The gas station was the kind of place that time forgot. Situated on the edge of a long stretch of highway in rural Ohio, it had a weather-beaten sign that creaked in the wind, faded letters promising open 24 hours despite most nights being dead quiet. The pumps were old models with peeling stickers and rusty handles, and the small convenience store inside smelled like stale coffee mixed with motor oil and dust. I started working there as the overnight clerk during my last year of college. The previous attendant quit without much warning, and the owner, an older man named Joe, was desperate for someone to cover the graveyard shift. It wasn't glamorous, and the pay wasn't great, but the hours fit with my class schedule, and honestly, I thought it would be easy. The first few nights were uneventful. The occasional trucker would pull in for fuel, and a couple of locals stopped by for cigarettes or snacks. Mostly, I spent hours staring at the security monitors, reading, or zoning out. The store was small, just a single room with a handful of aisles and a tiny restroom in the back. The lights were dim and flickered sometimes, especially during storms, but nothing out of the ordinary. About 2 weeks into the job, things started to feel off. It was late October, and the nights were getting colder and longer. One night, just past 3 a.m., I was restocking the shelves when I heard the front door chime. I glanced up expecting a customer, but the parking lot was empty. The door was closed. The sound had come from inside. I brushed it off as the wind messing with the door sensor. But the next night, around the same time, the door chimed again, and this time I heard footsteps, slow, heavy footsteps, moving across the floor behind me. I spun around, flashlight in hand, but no one was there. My heart was pounding. I checked every aisle, the bathroom, even the back storage closet. Nothing. I chalked it up to exhaustion and maybe a little too much caffeine. That same week, I noticed something strange on the security cameras. Around 3:15 a.m., a figure would appear near pump number 3. It was hard to make out details, just a shadowy outline of a man wearing a long coat and hat. The figure never got close to the door, never came inside. It just stood at the pump, as if waiting for something. Sometimes the pumps would activate on their own. The lights would flicker and the display screens would turn on, but no car was there. One night, I stayed watching the camera feed past 4 a.m. The figure appeared again. I saw it clearly this time. It was a man, pale and gaunt, with sunken eyes and a tired expression. He was holding a small, limp bundle wrapped in old cloth. I felt cold even through the warmth of the store. I wanted to call the police, but there was no crime. Nothing tangible to report. I told Joe about it, but he just laughed. "Old ghost stories," he said. "This place has been here since the 50s. Everyone says it's haunted." I laughed it off too, but the feeling didn't leave me. One night, a truck driver named Mike came in just before 3 a.m. He was a gruff guy with a thick beard and a cigarette dangling from his lips. "You see him?" he asked me quietly. "Who?" "The ghost comes every night around this time. Been haunting this station for years." I nodded, not sure what to say. Mike told me about a man named Charlie, who had been killed in a crash right outside the station in the 1950s. Charlie was driving his wife to the hospital when their car skidded on black ice. They both died on impact, and ever since, people claim to see Charlie waiting at the pumps for his wife to return. That night, after Mike left, I sat alone, eyes glued to the monitors. At exactly 3:13 a.m., the pumps flickered, and the figure appeared again, standing silently beside pump 3. I felt a chill run down my spine. Suddenly, the door jingled open. I looked up to see no one there. The wind howled outside, rattling the windows. I felt the temperature drop rapidly, breath turning to mist in front of me. A soft whisper echoed near my ear. "Help me." I spun around, flashlight shaking in my hand, but the store was empty. I locked the door and called Joe, but he told me to get some rest. I didn't sleep that day. The next night, I arrived early and inspected the pumps. I found fresh tire tracks in the mud by pump 3, like a car had stopped, but no vehicle was there now. That night, at 3:13 a.m., the figure appeared as usual. This time, it stepped forward, looking directly at me through the camera. His eyes were hollow, pleading. "Please." The whisper came again, louder. I wanted to run, but I stayed rooted to the spot. Suddenly, the lights flickered violently, and the store was plunged into darkness for a few seconds. When they came back on, the figure was gone. I packed up my things and quit the next day. The gas station stayed open for years after, but I never worked there again. Years later, I found a newspaper clipping from the local archives. It told the story of Charlie and his wife, Lucy, who was pregnant and rushing to the hospital that night. They never made it. People say Charlie's spirit still waits at the gas station, desperate for his wife to come back. I don't go near that place anymore. But sometimes late at night, when I drive down that highway, I see a flicker of light at Pump 3, and I hear a whisper in the wind. Help me. Story the end. There's a certain emptiness to working the overnight shift at a gas station, especially one tucked off a quiet two-lane highway, away from city lights and surrounded by stretches of woods that seem to suck in the darkness. The station I worked at wasn't a big chain, just a rundown, independent place, barely holding on with outdated pumps and flickering neon signs. It was the only one for about 30 miles in either direction, and most nights, we didn't get more than 2 or 3 customers between midnight and 6. I started working there during my second semester at community college. It was the only job that fit with my class schedule. My manager, Rob, was a grumpy man in his 50s with greasy hair and nicotine-stained fingers who mostly stayed holed up in the back office watching sports reruns. I didn't mind. The quiet meant I could get my homework done, and as long as I kept the shelves stocked and the floors mopped, no one bothered me. The weird stuff started around my 3rd week. It was a Tuesday night in early October, and the air had that biting chill that hinted winter wasn't far off. I was refilling the coffee machine when I heard the ding from the front door. I turned, expecting to see one of the regulars, maybe Hank, the trucker who always came in for coffee and beef jerky. But instead, there was this man I'd never seen before. He was tall, almost too tall, with a long gray coat that hung off his frame like it hadn't been washed in years. His skin was pale, not just light, but waxy like candle flesh, and his eyes were a weird shade of gray, almost clouded. He didn't speak when I greeted him, just looked at me for a long moment and then wandered over to the snack aisle. I remember watching him on the little black and white monitor behind the counter. He didn't seem to be shopping. He just stood there, staring at the shelf like he'd forgotten what food was. After maybe 5 minutes, he picked up a single bag of chips and shuffled toward the counter. I rang him up, and he didn't say a word. Not a hello, not a thank you. Just handed me a crumpled $5 bill, took his change, and walked back out into the night. The automatic door didn't make its usual ding when he left. I didn't think much of it then. Some nights the sensor glitched. But it didn't stop there. The next night, he came again. Same coat, same silent stare. This time, he just walked around the store without picking anything up. He paced between aisles for a while and eventually left without buying anything. And the night after that, and the night after that. Every night, like clockwork, sometime between 2:30 and 3 a.m., he would appear. Sometimes he would just stand at the freezer doors and look in without opening them. Sometimes he would sit in the plastic booth near the window and stare outside. I tried talking to him a couple of times, asking if he needed help or if he was okay, but he never acknowledged me. By the end of the week, I was starting to feel uneasy. Something about the way he moved, the total absence of emotion in his face. And there was this smell that seemed to linger for a while after he left, a sour, earthy odor, like wet leaves mixed with something rotting. At first, I thought maybe it was just something in the trash bins outside. I started noticing that the smell only came after he'd been there. One night, around 3:15, Rob actually walked out of the office and asked if I'd spilled something. He said the whole front area stank like moldy meat. I told him about the guy. Rob just grunted and said weirdos showed up at all hours and to keep an eye on the security cameras. That's when I went back and started watching the tapes. There were 4 small black and white monitors above the register, each hooked up to a different part of the station, 2 inside, 1 outside at the pumps, and 1 showing the parking lot and front entrance. I rewound the tape from the night before, expecting to see the guy's usual slow stroll through the door. But he wasn't there. I watched the entire segment 3 times. You could see me standing at the register, then glancing up, clearly reacting to someone walking in. I even looked right at him. But on the tape, the door never opened, and no one was there. My stomach sank. I clicked over to the other angles, including the one pointed straight at the front door. Nothing. Not even a flicker. I didn't know what to make of it. Maybe the camera had glitched. Maybe the feed had dropped out for a few seconds. I told myself anything to keep from thinking what it looked like I'd seen someone who wasn't really there. I didn't tell Rob. I figured he'd either laugh it off or worse, accuse me of screwing around with the equipment. But I started writing everything down in a notebook I kept under the counter. Each night, I recorded the time the man appeared, what he did, how long he stayed. I wanted to prove to myself I wasn't imagining it. Then one night he brought something with him. It was raining hard, the kind of storm that makes you feel cut off from the world. Around 2:45, I saw the tall figure again, this time holding what looked like a soaked leather duffel bag. He walked past the candy rack and set the bag down on the floor near the drink coolers. Then he turned and left. No purchase, no glance in my direction. Just gone. The bag stayed there for a full minute before I got up the courage to go check it out. I was halfway expecting it to be full of clothes or garbage. Instead, it was full of dirt. Black, clumpy soil, and nothing else. Except when I bent down to zip it closed again, I saw something poking out near the bottom, a corner of something soft and brownish. I reached in and pulled it out. It was a doll, old, tattered, and water-damaged. One of the eyes was missing, and the other stared up at me with a milky glaze that made my skin crawl. I took the bag and threw it straight into the dumpster out back. But later that night, when I took out the trash, the bag was back inside, sitting in the exact same spot near the coolers. The soil was still wet. The doll was still inside. I locked it in the mop closet. The next morning, when I came in for my shift, Rob asked why there was mud all over the floors. I checked the closet. The bag was gone. The weirdness started escalating after that. Sometimes the lights would flicker and not come back on until dawn. The back bathroom door would slam shut on its own, even when there was no breeze. A couple times, I heard faint humming coming from the storage room, like a child's lullaby being sung very softly. When I checked, it always stopped. I was getting maybe 2 or 3 hours of sleep during the day. My friends said I looked pale and sick. One night, I dozed off behind the counter and woke up to the sound of someone breathing heavily right next to my ear. There was no one there. Then came the night that finally broke me. It was early November, freezing cold, with frost creeping up the edges of the windows. Around 2:40, the man came in again. But this time, he didn't wander around. He walked straight up to the counter and stopped just a foot away from me. Up close, his face looked worse than I remembered, like something stretched thin over a skull. His lips were cracked and dry, his eyes almost completely clouded, and then he did something he'd never done before. He spoke. "I left something," he said. His voice was like leaves scraping pavement. I didn't say anything. I couldn't. My mouth was dry and my body frozen. "Downstairs," he said. "Help me dig." There was no basement. The gas station didn't even have a crawl space. Then he turned and walked away. But instead of exiting through the door, he walked toward the drink cooler, passed through the wall like smoke, and vanished. I quit the next day. Rob didn't believe anything I told him. Said I was sleep deprived and probably hallucinating. But 2 weeks later, the station caught fire. Electrical, they said. The whole back storage area went up in flames, took most of the interior with it. During the reconstruction, they had to dig out part of the foundation. And that's when they found the bones. The news said they were old, maybe decades old, buried deep in the soil under what used to be the freezer section. Small bones. Possibly a child's. There was no identification, no records. The case went cold within a month. I moved to another town and got a job in a grocery store. Never worked overnight again. But sometimes when I close my eyes at night, I still see those pale eyes, soaked leather bag, and the way he said those words. Help me dig. Story the end. The gas station where I worked sat on the edge of a mostly forgotten stretch of highway that ran between 2 small towns in West Texas. It was one of those old single-building service stations with flickering neon lights, rusted gas pumps, and a garage in the back that hadn't been used since the early 90s. I took the night shift because it paid a bit more, and honestly, I didn't think much could happen. The highway died off after dark, and except for the occasional trucker or traveler, it stayed quiet. I started there in the spring of 2019. My manager, a guy named Luis, was an older man who mostly sat in his office watching a little black and white TV. He gave me the basics: clean the floors, stock the shelves, check the bathrooms every hour. Simple stuff. He didn't warn me about anything weird, not right away at least. He just told me not to fall asleep, to keep an eye on the cameras, and to always turn on the outside lights after midnight, even if no one's around. At first, the shifts were uneventful. I brought books, sometimes watched YouTube videos, and kept to myself. The silence was thick, sure, but not unsettling. I liked the isolation. There was something calming about being the only person awake for miles. But things changed in the third week. It was a Wednesday night, cold, unusually foggy. Around 2:15 a.m., I noticed something on the monitor. The gas station had 4 external cameras: front lot, rear garage, side alley, and pump area. On the pump camera, I saw a figure standing by pump number 3. It wasn't a car, just a person. The image was grainy, but clear enough to make out that whoever it was wore something long, like a coat or maybe a dress. Long hair, pale face. There was no car, no sound, just them standing there. I got up and looked out the window. I couldn't see anyone. I flicked on the exterior lights as Luis had told me, and the fog lit up in a hazy yellow glow. Still no one. I checked the monitor again. Now the figure was gone. Just gone. I chalked it up to camera glitches. Maybe it was a moth close to the lens, or fog, or fatigue. I went back to my stool, told myself not to be stupid. But the next night, it happened again. Same time, same figure. This time standing closer to the door. Once again, they weren't there when I looked outside, but the monitor showed them for about 30 seconds before they vanished. The following night, I brought it up to Luis during the shift change. "You've seen her, haven't you?" he asked without even looking up from his thermos. "Who?" "That girl. Shows up around 2:15 every couple nights. You're not the first." He leaned forward, then finally looked at me. "Don't go outside. Don't talk to her. Keep the lights on, that's all." I asked who she was, but he didn't answer, just left. So I didn't go outside, I stayed put, I kept the lights on, but curiosity is a strong thing, especially when you're tired, bored, and maybe a little too confident. The next week, on a slow Tuesday, I decided to step out. It was just after 2 a.m., fog thick again. I waited by the door and watched the monitor until she appeared. Same pump, same long dark clothing, head down, hair over her face. I opened the door and stepped onto the concrete. The air was cold, unnaturally so. Not like spring at all. As I walked toward the pumps, I noticed the stillness. No wind, no sounds, no insects, no distant highway noise. Dead silence. And then I saw her. This time, not on the monitor, but in front of me. Maybe 10 feet away. Her head tilted slightly like she'd heard me, but she didn't move otherwise. "Hey," I said, trying to sound casual. "You okay?" She didn't speak. Her hands hung at her sides. Her clothes were soaked like she'd been caught in a downpour or bathe, though nothing was falling from the sky. I took a step closer. Her head snapped up. Her face, if you could call it that, was wrong. Sunken, waterlogged skin. Black eyes. Mouth open but too wide, like her jaw had been broken and never healed right. I turned and ran. I didn't even look back. I locked myself inside and slammed the security bolt across the door. When I looked at the monitor, she was gone again. I told Luis the next day. He wasn't mad, just disappointed. "Some say she drowned back in the 80s, he said. "Flooded creek, not far from here. No one found her body for weeks. Truckers used to see her walking along the highway waving for help. Some stopped. Those that did, well, they weren't right after. Stopped driving. Some never got home." He rubbed his face like he was exhausted. "She comes back around the time each year, March through May. Stops after the anniversary of the flood, like she's looking for someone." I started noticing other things after that. One night, the pumps turned on by themselves. The old mechanical clicking started out of nowhere. Clack, 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 like someone was lifting the nozzle. I looked at the cameras. No one there. But the numbers on pump number 3 began counting up as if fuel was flowing. Only I'd locked the pumps after closing like always. Another night, the radio in the back room, an old analog thing we never used, turned on by itself and played static for 20 minutes. The knob physically turned slowly like someone was adjusting it. And then came the knocking. It started gently, from the back garage door. Knock, knock, knock. At first I thought it was just the building settling. Old place, thin walls, but then it became rhythmic. Purposeful, 3 knocks, then a pause. Then 3 more. I checked the monitor. Nothing. I looked outside. Nothing. But every time I turned away, the knocking resumed. It wasn't until I found wet footprints, bare, human-sized, leading from the back garage into the hallway toward the restrooms that I fully broke down. I called Luis, told him I was quitting. He just sighed. You made it longer than most. I asked if anyone had ever gotten hurt. Not if they followed the rules. I didn't sleep the next night. I kept seeing her in my head. That face, that mouth, that awful stillness before she looked up. Weeks passed. I took a job at a car wash closer to town, the kind with people always around, bright lights, traffic, but I still drive by that station sometimes, just out of habit. I can't help it. Last month I passed by late one night. It was raining, light but steady. I slowed down just a little, wondering if it still happened, if she was still out there. And that's when I saw the lights on at the station, even though it had closed for good a year ago. A figure was standing under pump number 3. No car, just watching. I didn't stop. I didn't look again. But I knew it was her. Story the end. It was a Friday night in late October when I picked up a night shift at the gas station just off Route 6, about 10 miles outside of Marion, a quiet town in rural Iowa. The kind of place where people wave at you from their trucks and where most businesses close by 8 p.m. The gas station, though, stayed open 24/7, mostly serving long-haul truckers, emergency travelers, or the occasional lost soul. I was covering for Danny, the regular overnight guy, then who had called in sick with a fever. I had never done the night shift before. My usual hours were in the afternoon, when the place was a little livelier. During the day, we'd see kids buying snacks, farmers grabbing coffee, and locals chatting over lottery tickets. But this shift started at 10 p.m. and went till 6 a.m. The manager, Stacy, gave me a half-hearted good luck before she left, adding that things were usually pretty dead after midnight. That statement would prove eerily accurate. The first few hours were boring. I cleaned the coffee machines, restocked the shelves, and counted scratch-off tickets. One trucker came in around 11:15 p.m., bought a can of Monster, and mumbled something about fog rolling in heavy down the highway. I stepped outside after he left and saw what he meant. White mist was creeping across the blacktop, swallowing the yellow lines and blurring the road signs. It was the kind of fog that made sound feel dampened, like a blanket had been thrown over the world. By 12:30 a.m., not a single car had pulled into the lot for over an hour. The silence was unnerving. I decided to sit behind the counter and read through an old paperback someone had left behind, some pulp detective novel with pages yellowed from sun and time. I was 3 chapters in when the chime above the door rang. I looked up and saw a woman standing at the entrance. She was wearing an old-fashioned blue dress, the kind with white polka dots and a collar like something from the 1950s. Her hair was pinned up in curls, and she held a small black purse in both hands. What stood out immediately, though, was how dry she was. Despite the heavy fog and mist, not a drop clung to her. No dampness on her shoes, no frizz in her hair. She looked untouched. "Evening," I said, trying to sound casual. She didn't respond, just walked slowly down aisle 2, trailing her fingers lightly across the rows of canned soup and beans. I waited, expecting her to grab something or come up to the counter, but she simply kept walking. I stood up, unsure of what to do. "Ma'am, can I help you find anything?" I asked, stepping out from behind the register. She stopped and turned to look at me. Her eyes were pale, almost gray, and the way she stared made my chest tighten. Not in fear exactly, but in unease. She said nothing. Then, very softly, she asked, "Do you have a phone I can use?" "Sure," I said, gesturing behind the counter. "Right over here." She followed me back to the register, but instead of using the wall-mounted phone behind the counter, she pulled an old rotary dial phone out of her purse. My stomach dropped when I saw it. It was the kind of phone I had only ever seen in antique shops, black with a metal dial, the kind that clacked as you turned it. She placed it on the counter and stared at it for a moment. "May I?" she asked. I nodded, speechless. She picked up the receiver, dialed a number that I couldn't quite make out, and held the phone to her ear. I heard nothing. No dial tone, no static, not even a click. Just silence. After a moment she spoke. "Hello? It's me? No, I'm still here. I tried, but I think he's gone. Yes, I understand. I'll wait." She hung up, placed the phone back into her purse, and looked at me. "He's not coming," she said. I didn't know what to say. Something about her words sent chills through my spine. Before I could respond, the chime rang again, and she was gone. I looked around, stepped outside, even walked to the edge of the parking lot to peer into the fog, but there was nothing. No footprints. No sound of a car engine. Nothing. I returned inside and locked the door. The next few hours passed in slow, painful silence. I was jumpy. Every creak, every hum of the fridge compressor felt louder, more menacing. Around 3:45 a.m., the power flickered. All the lights dimmed to almost nothing, then flared back up. The coffee machine hissed as if air had been trapped inside. The chime rang again. No one was there. I got up to check the door, thinking maybe the wind or something had tripped it. But the air was still, dead still. I turned back toward the counter and stopped cold. The rotary phone was sitting on the counter, the same one the woman had used. I hadn't seen it since she vanished. I hadn't taken it. I hadn't even touched it. But there it was. I didn't dare approach it. I just stared. The phone rang. The sound was so sharp, so loud in the silence that I almost screamed. It rang again. I forced myself forward, one shaky step at a time, until I was close enough to see the dial. It was still. The phone rang a third time. I picked up the receiver with a trembling hand and put it to my ear. Static. Then a voice, soft, female, whispering, "He's here now." The line went dead. The lights flickered again, and the whole store was plunged into darkness for exactly 3 seconds. When they returned, I saw movement in the security mirror above the snacks aisle. Someone was walking. I turned slowly. A man was standing near the refrigerated drinks. He was tall, in a worn brown coat and a brimmed hat that cast a shadow over his eyes. His face was pale, but it wasn't that which scared me. It was the blood. Dried blood soaked the front of his shirt down to his belt. "Sir?" I called, my voice cracking. He didn't move, didn't acknowledge me. I reached under the counter and grabbed the baseball bat we kept for emergencies, then began walking toward him. "Sir, you can't be back there. The store's closed." When I got to the back of aisle 4, he was gone. There was nowhere he could have gone without me seeing. I checked the coolers, the storage room, even the restroom. Nothing. I returned to the front of the store and froze again. The rotary phone was gone. My chest was pounding. I thought about calling Stacy or even the police, but what would I tell them? That a ghost called a phone that shouldn't exist? That a blood-soaked man had disappeared into thin air? At 5:58 a.m., just as dawn began to tint the foggy sky with pale blue, I saw a pickup pull into the lot. Stacy got out, waving cheerfully as she approached. "Quiet night?" she asked. I just nodded. She stepped inside and paused, looking around. "You okay? You look like hell." I didn't answer. Later, after I went home and tried to sleep with little success, I started digging. I found out that the gas station had been built on the site of an old diner called Gracie's Stop, which had burned down in 1956. A woman matching the description of the one I saw, blue polka dot dress, black purse, had worked there. She was waiting for her fiancé the night of the fire. He never showed. He had been killed in a car crash on Route 6, just a mile from the diner. No one ever told her. She died in the fire waiting for him. The man I saw near the coolers? That description fit her fiancé, a traveling salesman from Nebraska, found dead at the wheel of his car, soaked in blood after a collision with a semi. I told myself I wouldn't go back, that one night was enough. But weeks later, I found myself passing the station late at night, and I stopped. The lights were on. The door opened. The chime rang. I didn't go inside. I just stood there in the parking lot staring through the glass until I saw her again. The woman in the polka dot dress, standing behind the counter, holding the rotary phone. She lifted it, dialed, and waited. I turned and left. I never worked another night shift. Again. Story the end. It was the middle of January when I got hired at a 24-hour gas station off Highway 22, about 10 miles outside a small Kentucky town named Letcher's Hollow. The place was remote, mostly surrounded by fields, a few rusted-out barns in the distance, and a long stretch of woods on the eastern side that seemed to darken quicker than anywhere else. My hours were from 10 p.m. to 6 a.m., the graveyard shift. That was fine by me. I didn't have much of a life then. No girlfriend, no close family, just a one-bedroom rental and a car I barely kept running. The manager, Curtis, was an old guy who mostly sat in the back office during the day's shift, fiddling with books and watching the CCTV monitors like a hawk. During my orientation, he made a point to tell me not to mess around. "You see something strange, don't go looking for it. Just call me," he'd said, eyes not quite meeting mine. I figured he was just being overly cautious, maybe trying to scare me a little. My first couple of weeks were slow and uneventful. I stocked shelves, cleaned the bathroom, mopped the floor around 2 a.m. every night, and watched the occasional semi-truck roll in for fuel. Most drivers didn't say much. Some didn't even come in, just filled up and left. Others would buy coffee or jerky, always tired-eyed and short on words. One guy, I remember, was muttering to himself the entire time he was in the store, repeating, "They don't sleep out here," under his breath like a broken record. He left without paying for his water. I let it go. Then things started to get weird. It began subtly. Items would fall off the shelves for no reason. At first, I thought I was just being clumsy when I stocked them, but I'd check the security camera footage, and sometimes I'd see things just tipping over on their own. No draft, no vibration, nothing. Once, a row of chips slid forward one by one like something was dragging fingers across them. I told myself it was uneven shelving, maybe mice. A week later, I was in the bathroom cleaning when I heard the bell over the front door chime. I stepped out, but there was no one there. I checked outside. No cars. The cameras showed nothing. I thought maybe it had malfunctioned, but the bell kept chiming randomly through the night, sometimes 2 or 3 times within a minute. I'd check every time. No one. Then came the voices. One night, while I was restocking the cooler, I heard someone whisper my name. I turned, expecting to see someone standing near the snack aisle. No one. I brushed it off, maybe just hearing things, but it happened again a few nights later. This time louder. "Matt." My name, plain as day, in a raspy voice that sounded like it came from the back room. My blood ran cold. I crept over, grabbed the small metal bat we kept behind the counter, and opened the door to the back room. It was empty. Nothing out of place, but the voice stayed in my head for the rest of the night. I finally brought it up to Curtis the next morning. He didn't seem surprised. "Yeah," he said, rubbing his temples. "Some weird shit happens around here at night. You'll get used to it." "Used to it?" I said, almost laughing. He just looked at me and said, "Don't follow anything you hear. Don't open the door if you hear knocking after midnight. And if someone comes in without casting a shadow, don't talk to them." He was serious. His tone was dead flat. I asked if he was messing with me, but he just said, "I'm telling you so you don't end up like Ray." I didn't ask who Ray was. I should have. That night, I paid closer attention to the shadows. I felt ridiculous doing it. Every customer, I checked to see if their reflection appeared in the glass doors. Every time I opened the cooler, I looked to make sure I could see my own shadow stretching behind me under the harsh fluorescent lights. Everything seemed normal, until about 3:17 a.m. I remember the exact time because I'd just finished scanning the logbook when the door chimed. I looked up and a woman had walked in. She was tall, thin, wearing a long gray coat. She had long, stringy black hair that covered part of her face. I greeted her like normal, and she didn't say anything back. She just walked slowly toward the back of the store, then down an aisle. I looked down at the counter monitor. The camera feed showed nothing in that aisle. I squinted. I could see the shelves, the snacks, the cooler beyond, but no woman. I stepped out and walked cautiously toward the aisle. It was empty. I turned in every direction. Nothing. But the hair on the back of my neck stood up. Then the bathroom door slammed shut. I ran to it and knocked. "Ma'am, you okay in there?" No response. I knocked again. Silence. I tested the door. It was locked. After a minute, I ran back to the counter, grabbed the spare bathroom key, and unlocked the door. I opened it slowly. The lights were flickering, and a wet, earthy smell filled the air, like damp soil. There was no one in there. Not in the stalls, not under the sink, but the mirror was fogged, and written in the condensation were the words, "Don't talk to her." My legs almost gave out. I closed the door and locked it from the outside. I didn't clean that bathroom for the rest of the week. I barely slept during the day anymore. Every noise I heard in my apartment made me jump. When I did sleep, I had dreams of standing in the gas station with the lights off, surrounded by whispering voices. One voice always stood out, low and urgent, telling me to leave, telling me she's coming back. A few nights later, around 4 a.m., I was mopping when the power went out. Not just a flicker. The whole place went dark in an instant. No lights, no hum of the cooler, no buzzing from the sign outside. Dead silence. I froze. The emergency lights above the register kicked on after about 10 seconds, dull orange glows that barely lit the store. I reached for my phone to use as a flashlight and noticed something on the security feed. Even though the store was in near darkness, the cameras showed a figure walking down the main aisle. Slow, barefoot. The kind of movement that didn't seem to disturb the air. I dropped the mop and locked myself behind the counter. I watched the screen. The figure kept walking straight toward the counter, but I saw nothing in front of me. The monitor showed it only feet away. But the store itself, empty. I remembered what Curtis said. Don't talk to them. Don't follow sounds. Don't open the door after midnight. But I'd already talked to her. The monitor flickered, then went black. All of them. My phone screen glitched for a second too. I felt a cold presence behind me. I turned. There was no one, but the air smelled like wet dirt again, and there were muddy footprints on the tile, leading right up to the counter, then disappearing. I didn't move until sunrise. When Curtis came in, I told him everything. He sighed deeply and poured himself a cup of burnt coffee. You lasted longer than Ray, he said, eyes distant. He only made it 3 nights. Thought he saw his sister outside, waving at him through the glass. She died years ago. What happened to him? I asked. Curtis paused. He opened the door, walked out, never came back. Cops searched the fields, found his shoes out by the tree line, nothing else. I wanted to quit, but I didn't. I don't know why. Maybe because it felt like if I walked away, the things I'd seen would follow me home. A few more weeks passed. The activity ebbed and flowed. Some nights it was quiet. Others, it felt like I was being watched the entire shift. One night I went out to take the trash to the dumpster out back and saw something move at the edge of the woods. A pale face, just beyond the tree line, ducking behind a trunk. I dropped the trash bag and ran back inside. The next night, Curtis didn't show up in the morning. I waited until 8 a.m., then called him. No answer. I called again at noon. Nothing. That night, he didn't show. The next morning, a deputy came by and asked about him. Said no one had seen Curtis since the night before. I checked the tapes. Around 1:13 a.m., Curtis walked into the store. I wasn't working that night, my only day off that week. He looked around nervously, went to the back office, then left suddenly out the front door. Walked across the parking lot toward the woods. The cameras showed him stop at the edge. Then he just vanished. No glitch, no jump cut. One frame he's standing there, the next, gone. No one's seen him since. The gas station stayed open under a new manager. Some college kid named Brian took the night shift after I finally left. He lasted a month. Quit after he claimed something tried to pull him into the cooler when he went to get more milk. I moved 100 miles away, got a job at a different place, day shifts only. But sometimes at night, I still hear the chime of the gas station door. Faint, like it's echoing from a long way off. And twice now I've seen muddy footprints on the linoleum floor of my apartment kitchen in the morning. I never walk in mud. Story the end. It was the kind of gas station that looked like it had been there since the 70s, tucked off a quiet rural highway in Mississippi, about 15 minutes outside of Yazoo City. The canopy lights buzzed and flickered as moths spiraled around them, casting broken light onto the cracked concrete below. A faded, open 24 hours sign glowed weakly from the storefront window, though there were nights it looked more like a warning than a welcome. I started working there the summer after my sophomore year of college. The pay wasn't great, but I needed money and a flexible night shift to work around my online classes. My uncle knew the owner, Earl, who was pushing 70 but still ran the place himself during the day. He was a wiry man with liver-spotted hands and a voice like gravel. Earl warned me about a lot of things, drunks, thieves, stray dogs, but he didn't warn me about what mattered most. The first few weeks on the job were uneventful. The night shift ran from 10 p.m. to 6 a.m., and most nights I'd maybe see 5 or 6 customers. I'd stock the shelves, mop the floor, and half-watch the security monitor while sipping lukewarm coffee. Nothing about the place screamed haunted. It just felt old, like it had soaked in time until the walls couldn't remember what decade it was anymore. It started on a Wednesday, around 2:30 in the morning. I remember it clearly because I'd just restocked the beef jerky rack and was behind the counter when I noticed the camera feeds flicker. The screen jumped once, then went black for a split second before coming back. All the exterior views, pumps, rear alley, front lot, were fine. But the inside feed, the one pointed right at the counter, was static. I tapped the monitor casing, smacked the side a couple of times, but it didn't change. Then, just as suddenly, the feed returned, but the angle was wrong. The camera was supposed to be fixed directly above, angled downward, but now it looked like it had shifted somehow, tilted toward the floor near the coffee station. I glanced up. The camera itself hadn't moved. It was exactly where it had always been, but the feed showed otherwise. I checked the floor by the coffee machine. Nothing. Not even a spill. I told myself it was probably just some glitch. Maybe the wiring was going bad. I made a note for Earl to check it out in the morning and left it at that. 2 nights later, it got weirder. A man came in around 3 a.m. I barely heard him enter. The bell above the door didn't ring. He was tall, wore a dark green parka with the hood pulled low, and gloves even though it was the middle of June. He didn't speak when I greeted him, just gave a small nod and walked slowly through the aisles. I kept an eye on him. Rural or not, you don't ignore people who walk in like that at that hour. He picked up a bottle of motor oil and carried it to the counter. He didn't say anything, just placed a crumpled $10 bill beside it. When I rang it up and reached to give him his change, he didn't move. He just stared at me. And then he asked, in a voice so quiet I barely heard it, "Do you still keep it in the freezer?" I blinked. "Sorry?" His eyes were pale, almost cloudy, and his skin had a waxy, yellowed tone like old parchment. He nodded once at the back of the store. "The freezer, in the far corner." I looked behind me, confused. "You mean the ice cream?" But he didn't respond. He turned and walked out, leaving the change on the counter and the motor oil behind. I watched him leave, but when I stepped outside a few seconds later, the lot was empty. No car, no footsteps on the gravel, nothing. I checked the back freezer. I don't know why. Just curiosity, I guess. It was a large, old walk-in unit where we stored bags of ice and some overstocked sodas. Everything looked normal, but in the back corner, just as the man had said, I found something strange. There was a small square of concrete cut out and patched back in. The rest of the floor was smooth, old tile, but this section looked newer. And the patch job wasn't very clean, almost like someone had rushed to seal it. I mentioned it to Earl the next day, half joking. He didn't laugh. "Don't go messing around in there," he said, suddenly serious. "That freezer's older than I am, been through a few floods. That corner was where a pipe burst back in '86. We had to do some repairs." He looked at me long, like he was deciding something. "You hear any strange noises, just keep your head down. This place sees a lot of things it don't talk about." That was the first time I considered quitting. But I didn't. Maybe I was too curious. Maybe I needed the job more than I realized. Things escalated over the next few weeks. The bell above the door would ring even when no one came in. The cooler doors would open on their own. One night, I came back from the restroom and found all the candy bars rearranged into a spiral on the floor. I thought someone had come in and done it while I was gone, but the camera feed showed nothing, just static for 3 minutes, and then the spiral was there. But the worst came in July. It was a stormy night. Thunder rolled in like an angry animal, and the rain came down so hard it blurred the windows. Around 4 a.m., I lost power for a few seconds, just long enough to throw everything into darkness. The backup generator kicked in almost immediately, humming like it hadn't been used in years. I was walking back toward the counter when I heard the freezer door creak open. Not swing, not slam, just a soft creak like it had been nudged. I grabbed the flashlight from behind the register and made my way back. The door to the walk-in freezer was open just a few inches. I nudged it fully open and stepped inside. Cold air swirled around me, thick with the smell of ice and mildew. I swept the flashlight beam across the room. There was someone crouched in the back corner. It was a woman, naked, filthy, with long black hair hanging over her face. Her skin was mottled blue and white, like she'd been frozen. Her eyes were open wide, locked onto mine, and her lips were moving, but no sound came out. I couldn't breathe. My body froze, every instinct screaming at me to run. But I couldn't. I just stood there, locked in place, flashlight shaking in my hand. Then she reached out. Her fingers were black, frostbitten looking, and as she moved, her skin crackled like ice breaking. She touched the patched concrete with one hand and pointed to it with the other, mouthing something again, over and over. I backed out of the freezer and slammed the door shut. I didn't stop to think. I didn't check the cameras. I grabbed my phone and called Earl. He answered on the second ring. "You saw her, didn't you?" he said, no surprise in his voice. I didn't speak. "I told you not to mess around in there. I wanted answers. I wanted to know who she was. What had happened in that freezer?" Earl finally told me the truth. Back in the late 70s, before he owned the place, the gas station was run by a guy named Walter Grady. Walter was known to be a little unstable, had some war trauma, heavy drinker, the usual. One summer, a young woman disappeared off the highway nearby. They never found her body. Some folks suspected Walter, said he'd acted strange that week, but there was never any proof. A few years later, after Walter skipped town and the place changed hands, the new owner found something while doing repairs in the freezer. A tarp, bones, a woman's shoe. The police were called, an investigation followed, but the remains were so decomposed and poorly preserved that no positive ID could be made. The station quietly reopened months later under a new name. No one talked about it again. Earl told me he'd always felt her there, especially at night. Cold spots, whispers. Sometimes she'd appear to certain people, always in that corner. He tried to seal the floor out of respect, but that don't bury guilt, he said, and it don't bury her. I quit that night. I never stepped foot in that gas station again. Earl didn't blame me. He didn't even ask me to stay. A few months later, I read online that the station had burned down. Electrical fault, they said. Earl survived, but he never reopened. The land sits empty now, overgrown and silent. Sometimes I wonder if she's still there, waiting for someone to see her, to hear what she has to say. Maybe if I'd listened, really listened, I would have understood. But I was too scared. Whatever happened in that freezer, it never left. It lingered like the smell of oil and rust. And I still see her in my dreams sometimes, crouched in that corner, reaching out through the cold. Story the end. It was in the dead of winter, the kind where the cold seeps through your boots and into your bones no matter how many layers you wear. I just started working night shifts at a small 24-hour gas station off Route 87. Just outside of town, no one remembered unless they needed gas between the interstate and the mountains. The place was remote. No homes nearby, no businesses for miles, just a thin black ribbon of highway and the hum of trucks passing every so often. The building was old too, probably built in the 70s, with flickering fluorescent lights, a buzzing sign half lit with a missing O in open, and a restroom out back with a warped wooden door that never locked right. I took the job because I needed the money. My car had broken down the month before. I was living with my cousin in a cramped basement room, and this was the only place hiring with no questions asked. The manager, Jeff, was a chain-smoking guy in his 50s who'd seen it all. He warned me the first day. "You'll get weirdos at night, drifters, meth heads, maybe a coyote or two. But if you hear knocking and no one's there, don't open the door." I laughed at the time, thought it was some local scare tactic, like those stories people tell to haze the new guy. But he didn't smile, didn't even blink, just told me the till was always short by a few cents and not to bother trying to figure out why. My first few nights were uneventful, mostly truckers coming through, the occasional teenager daring friends to buy beer with fake IDs, and once a woman looking for a lost dog that I never saw. I passed the time drinking burnt coffee, watching the security monitors, and scrolling through old horror stories online, not realizing I was about to be part of one. It started on the fifth night. Around 2:30 a.m., I heard the chime from the door sensor, one of those tinny ding-dongs meant to alert you when someone walks in. I looked up from my phone expecting to see a customer, but the door never opened. I rewound the CCTV, but nothing was there. Just the parking lot, still and empty under the buzzing overhead light. I figured it was a glitch. Those things happened with old buildings. But then, the next night, same thing. 2:30 a.m. The chime, but no one there. This time I went outside to check. The wind had picked up, sending wrappers and a crumpled soda can skittering across the pavement. But there were no cars, no footprints. just the echo of the highway in the distance and the feeling, strong and sudden, of being watched. The third night, I brought a flashlight and waited for it. 2:30 a.m. came, and the chime went off again. This time I ran to the door and flung it open. The cold air punched me in the face. The only movement was a flickering light above the gas pump. But something caught my eye in the corner of the lot, near the dumpsters. There was a man, or something that looked like one. He stood still, unnaturally still, his face obscured by a hood or a shadow. I couldn't tell. I shouted, "Hey, you okay?" and took a step toward him. That's when I realized he wasn't facing me. He was turned slightly, like he was looking past me, at the building. His limbs were long, awkward, like his arms hung too far down his sides. I blinked, and he was gone. I spun around. Nothing, no sound, no footfalls, just silence and the humming of the soda fridge behind me. My heart was hammering. I locked the door behind me and stayed behind the counter the rest of the shift, watching the monitor until the sun came up. I told Jeff the next day, and all he said was, "You shouldn't have gone outside." That was it. No questions, no disbelief, just that. I considered quitting, but I needed the money too badly. I told myself it was a trick of the light, a dream even. People hallucinate when they're tired, right? The next week was quiet, mostly. I brought headphones to distract myself, but I couldn't shake the feeling I was being watched. Not just outside, inside too. Like someone was behind the shelves watching me from the snack aisle. Twice I caught movement on the edge of the monitors, but when I rewound the tape, nothing showed. The worst night started like any other. It was snowing heavily, and not a single car had pulled in for hours. Around 2:20 a.m., the lights in the station flickered. The coffee machine sputtered and hissed. I went to reset the breaker in the back when I heard it. A knock on the glass door. 3 short knocks, deliberate. Too steady for a drunk or a prank. I turned and looked. No one was there. Then again, 3 more knocks. I crept toward the front and peered out. Just the storm, the snow blowing in thick curtains. The glass was fogging slightly from the inside, and then I saw it. Something smeared across the door. It was a handprint. Not greasy or smudged with dirt, but red, like someone had pressed a bloodied hand against the door. I backed away, trembling, and went for the phone. It had no dial tone. I checked my cell. No service. The knocking started again. Now faster, more aggressive. I dropped behind the counter and pulled the emergency bat we kept under the register. I didn't want to go out there again. I didn't want to see what was knocking. But the power cut out completely. Everything went black except for the faint red glow of the exit sign. And in that silence, I heard breathing. Not mine. Not human. Wet, ragged breathing. It was coming from the snack aisle. I stayed crouched, holding my breath. Then I heard footsteps. Slow, uneven, dragging steps. They moved from the back of the store toward the front. My heart was going to explode. I was sure of it. Then came the voice, dry and whispery like leaves brushing concrete. "Open the door." I don't know why, but something in me said not to respond. I squeezed the bat tighter and stayed still. "Let me in." The voice was right behind the counter now. But when I turned and looked, nothing. No one. I stayed there until dawn. When the lights flickered back on and the heat kicked in again, I dared to look at the door. The handprint was gone. The cameras? Dead. Footage erased. Jeff said the system had shorted during the storm, but when I described the voice and the breathing, he finally told me what happened. 10 years earlier, a man had frozen to death outside the gas station. He'd been walking from a broken-down truck, tried to get inside during a storm, but the attendant had locked the doors and ignored the knocking, thinking it was a robbery. The guy died at the door, his hand pressed to the glass, eyes open. The clerk quit the next morning and was never heard from again. They found the body the next day. Blood had pooled from his nose and mouth, freezing to the glass. No one ever cleaned the stain properly. And every winter since, the night shift gets visits around the same time he died. Jeff had stayed on because he didn't work nights anymore. He said, whatever it is, it only comes when the road is empty and the wind's howling, but it always comes back. I don't work there anymore. I quit a week later, after another night of knocking and a face appearing in the mirror in the restroom. One that wasn't mine. It was pale, frostbitten, and staring. I still avoid Route 87 when I can, but sometimes, on cold nights, when I'm driving and see a station in the distance, I swear I hear 3 knocks echo in my head. Story the end. It was the kind of place you wouldn't notice if you weren't looking for it. One of those off-the-highway gas stations nestled between dense patches of trees and long-forgotten farmland. I had been driving from Columbus to Pittsburgh late at night, too late really, and my eyes had started getting heavy. So when I saw the flickering sign that read Gas and Goods 24HR, I didn't hesitate to pull in. There weren't any other cars. The lights on the pumps were dim and fluttering like they hadn't been properly serviced in years. But the store inside looked open. I figured I could grab a coffee, maybe a snack, stretch my legs, and get back on the road. The air outside was cold, and there was that heavy, damp smell like after a storm, though the sky was clear. Crickets chirped low and steady somewhere beyond the darkness of the tree line. I stepped inside and was immediately struck by the silence. Not the quiet you'd expect from a late-night stop, but complete, unnatural silence. There was no buzzing from lights, no hum from a refrigerator, not even a low-volume radio playing in the background. Just stillness. The man behind the counter didn't look up. He was hunched over, facing down toward something behind the register. His face was hidden by the bill of a baseball cap. I gave a polite, "Hey," as I walked in, but he didn't respond. I brushed it off. Maybe he was asleep or hard of hearing. I went straight to the back where the fridge cases were and reached for a bottle of iced coffee. The cooler was colder than I expected. It fogged up the bottle instantly and made my fingers sting. As I turned to walk back toward the front, I passed a small section of old-style candy and beef jerky, then stopped when I saw something strange on the floor. It looked like a small trail of dried mud, but the mud wasn't brown. It was dark, nearly black. I crouched down and touched it, and it was sticky. That's when I heard it. A low creak from one of the aisles behind me. I turned quickly, expecting maybe someone else was in the store after all, but there was nothing. Just rows of dusty shelves with canned goods and cleaning supplies. I glanced up at the security mirror mounted in the corner of the ceiling. In it, I saw the back of someone, a figure standing completely still in the aisle parallel to mine. I whipped around. Nothing. When I looked back at the mirror, the figure was gone. I shook my head, laughed under my breath. I chalked it up to exhaustion. Long drives, minimal sleep, too much caffeine. It messes with your head. I walked back up to the counter, bottle in hand, and the guy behind the register was still hunched over, unmoving. "Hey, man," I said, a little louder this time. "You open?" Slowly, he raised his head. I took a step back. His eyes were sunken, completely bloodshot, and something about his face looked wrong, not disfigured. Just off, like his skin was stretched too tightly over his bones. He didn't blink. "Cash only," he croaked. His voice was brittle and dry, like someone who hadn't spoken in days. I reached into my wallet, pulled out a $5, and placed it on the counter. He didn't move to take it. Instead, he just stared at me, his mouth slightly open, breath wheezing in and out. I left the money anyway, took my coffee, and gave him a nod. I was almost out the door when I heard him speak again. "Don't go around back." I froze, half expecting to have misheard him. I turned to ask what he meant, but he'd already gone back to his hunched position, still as a statue. Outside, the night felt heavier. I climbed into my car, started the engine, and let it idle while I took a few sips of the coffee. It was lukewarm and bitter, but I didn't care. My phone buzzed beside me. No signal. I tried reloading the GPS. Nothing. I figured I could just keep going on the highway and it would reconnect soon. But before I shifted into drive, I looked toward the side of the building. There was a single floodlight mounted on the corner, and its beam illuminated part of the alley behind the gas station. I could just barely make out a shape. A shed or maybe a storage unit. I shouldn't have been curious, but the guy's warning played over in my head. Don't go around back. That was the kind of thing that stuck with you. And I've never been good at leaving things alone. I reversed, backed up around the side of the building, and slowly edged the car toward the rear lot. The back of the gas station was unpaved, uneven, and overgrown in parts. Grass poked through cracks in the asphalt, and there were deep tire ruts filled with murky water. The building itself was old, with faded paint and rust streaks under the windows. And then I saw it. There was a door. It didn't match the rest of the station. It was heavy metal with a small barred window at the top, like something from a factory. The area around it was wet, not rain wet. It was like the ground had been soaked from the inside out. I killed the engine and got out, my footsteps crunching on gravel. The air was thick back there, and a faint odor hung in the air. Rotting. Sweet and sour like meat left too long in the sun. I walked to the door, cautiously. As I got closer, I saw what looked like scratch marks along the metal. Long, deep gouges, as if someone or something had tried to claw its way out. Or in. There was a keypad next to the handle, but the door was slightly ajar. The edge rested against the frame, not latched. Against all better judgment, I nudged it open with my foot. Darkness. Pure pitch black. A concrete floor, steps leading down, and that smell, stronger now. I pulled my phone out and turned on the flashlight. The beam hit a wall about 10 feet down. The concrete was stained, and there were more scratches, deeper ones. I thought I saw something move at the bottom, but when I leaned closer, the door suddenly slammed shut behind me. I jumped back and tried to open it, but it was locked. The keypad lit up red. I banged on the door, yelled, but no sound echoed back, as if the night itself was swallowing my voice. Then I heard the breathing. It was low and ragged, coming from below. Not human. It echoed up the stairs slowly, deliberately, accompanied by a slow dragging sound, something being pulled or dragged up the concrete steps. I didn't wait. I ran back to the car, fumbled with the keys, and started it in a panic. My headlights lit up the side of the building, and for a moment, I saw something in my rearview mirror. It stood just inside the open doorway, too tall, too thin. Its arms were disproportionately long, fingers curling around the doorframe. It had no face, just a smooth stretch of skin where one should be. Then it stepped back into the darkness, and the door slammed shut again, on its own. I gunned it out of there, flying back onto the highway, tires kicking up gravel. It wasn't until 20 minutes later that my phone buzzed to life and the GPS reloaded. The signal was fine again. My heart was still hammering in my chest. I pulled into a rest stop and sat in the car for nearly an hour, unable to shake the feeling that something had followed me. A week later, I tried looking up the gas station. No such place showed up on the map between Columbus and Pittsburgh. I retraced the route and found nothing. No side road, no clearing in the trees, no building. Like it had never been there. Sometimes, though, when I'm driving late at night on that stretch of highway, I see a flickering sign out of the corner of my eye. And I never stop. Not anymore. Story the end. It was the kind of gas station most people barely noticed during the day and avoided entirely after dark. One pump, a dim yellow light buzzing overhead, and a tiny convenience store that hadn't updated its signage since the early 90s. Located on a desolate stretch of Highway 19 in northern Louisiana, it was sandwiched between thick woods on either side, with no other sign of civilization for miles. The kind of place you wouldn't even stop for unless you were desperate, or in my case, on the night shift with no other options. I started working there in September 2020. I was 24, recently laid off from a warehouse job, and scraping by with whatever I could find. The station was always looking for employees because no one lasted more than a few months. Locals had rumors, of course, people disappearing, seeing things in the woods, but I didn't put much stock in that kind of talk. I thought it was just a bunch of backwoods superstition. My manager was a quiet man named Lonnie, who handed me the keys and gave me a single rule: never go outside between 2:30 and 3:30 a.m. No explanation, no joke in his tone, just a firm warning. I laughed when he said it, but he just looked at me and said, "You'll see. Just stay inside." The first few nights were uneventful. I'd bring my own food, listen to podcasts, maybe get a few late-night truckers or lost travelers. Most didn't talk much. The ones who did said weird things, though. One guy with a Texas license plate leaned in close and whispered, "I saw someone standing behind your sign out there." I looked, and of course, no one was there. Another woman, shaking and clutching her purse like her life depended on it, asked if I could lock the door behind her when she left. I asked why, and she said, "Something followed me here." The creepiest part? Most of them weren't drunk or high. They were just scared. Still, I figured it was just nerves. Until October 4th. That night started slow, like usual. I had a coffee, a box of powdered donuts, and was halfway through an episode of a paranormal podcast when I noticed the station had gotten unusually quiet. Normally there'd be a faint hum from the coolers or a chirping cricket or two outside, but it was dead silent. Even the buzzing light outside seemed fainter. I glanced at the clock, 2:27 a.m. I remembered Lonnie's rule, and I felt a chill crawl up my spine. It wasn't the kind of fear you could rationalize. It felt like something primal, like the feeling animals get before an earthquake. I decided to lock the doors, just in case, and flip the closed sign. That's when I saw movement near pump 1. It was a man, tall, maybe 6'5", wearing what looked like old faded overalls. But something was off. He wasn't moving right. His steps were too slow, too deliberate, like he was struggling against something. And his head was tilted too far to the left, as if his neck had been broken. I stepped back and watched him through the glass, frozen. He didn't come up to the door. He just walked in a slow circle around pump 1, dragging one foot behind the other. It reminded me of a video I'd seen of someone having a seizure while standing. I looked at the clock again, 2:32. I turned off the lights inside the store, hoping he'd go away if he thought no one was there. But when I looked back, he was gone. Just like that. No sound, no footsteps, just gone. I waited until 3:35 before I unlocked the door again. I didn't tell Lonnie the next morning. I didn't want him to think I couldn't handle it, but I started taking his rule more seriously. The next few nights were tense. Every bump or creak made my skin crawl. On October 8th, I brought my dog Scout with me. He was a mutt, part lab, part shepherd, and usually fearless. He'd been fine when I brought him to the warehouse before, even liked the smell of oil and dust. But that night, at exactly 2:30, Scout stood up from behind the counter and started growling at the front door. I hadn't seen or heard anything, but he was locked in on something. Then he started barking, loud and sharp, like he wanted to tear through the glass. I tried to calm him down, but he wouldn't stop. Then he whimpered and backed away, tail between his legs, and refused to come out from under the counter for the rest of the shift. That was the last night I brought him with me. Lonnie came in the next morning and saw me sitting pale and exhausted. He nodded like he already knew. "They don't like dogs," he said. That was the first time he ever acknowledged it. I asked him, "What are they?" He stared at me for a long second, then said, "Used to be a church out there, behind the woods, burned down in the 70s. People say the preacher went mad and locked everyone inside, lit it up himself, 8 dead. They never found the preacher." I said nothing. Lonnie continued. "Sheriff said it was arson. Never caught the guy. Folks think the land's cursed." I didn't want to believe it. I still tried to explain it away. Old trauma, bad vibes, gas leaks, whatever. But things kept happening. On October 12th, the door chime rang at 3:02 a.m. It shouldn't have. I had the doors locked. I knew they were locked. I checked them 3 times. But the chime rang, and I turned to see a little boy standing in the aisle between the chips and the soda cooler. He couldn't have been more than 7, barefoot, in a white shirt and shorts, so pale he looked almost gray. His eyes were wide and unblinking. I opened my mouth to say something, but he turned and ran, faster than any kid I've ever seen, toward the back of the store. I chased after him, thinking maybe it was a prank. But when I rounded the corner, he was gone. Completely vanished. No doors open, no hiding spots. The next morning, Lonnie didn't even flinch when I told him. "They like to play sometimes," he said. "Don't follow them. Ever." After that, the dream started. It was always the same. I'd be working the shift, and the lights would go out. I'd turn to see the glass door fogging up from the outside, a handprint appearing in the middle. Then the door would creak open, even though I locked it. I'd try to move, try to run, but I was frozen. And then I'd feel breathing on my neck. I'd wake up in a cold sweat, heart racing, always at 3:17 a.m. I lasted until Halloween. October 31st started quiet. Lonnie came in earlier than usual and handed me a thermos of coffee. "You going to be okay tonight?" he asked. "Same as every night." "Don't be brave," he said. "If something knocks, don't answer. If something cries, don't help. If something talks, don't listen." It sounded like nonsense, but it wasn't. That night at 2:29 a.m., the station went silent again. I locked the doors and turned off the lights. I sat behind the counter and waited. At 2:33 a.m., the knocking started. Not on the door, on the glass window by the bathrooms in the back. 3 soft knocks. Then again. I held my breath. Then came the crying. It sounded like a woman. Deep sobs, muffled, as if she were standing just outside the building. I closed my eyes and tried to hum to myself. At 2:50, the crying stopped, but a voice started, whispering my name over and over from every direction. It didn't sound angry. It sounded sad, desperate, like someone trapped in a well. I curled up behind the counter and held my ears. When the sun came up, everything stopped. Lonnie came in around 6. He took one look at me and said, "You done?" I nodded. I didn't even grab my things. I walked out and never went back. 2 weeks later, I saw a job ad online. Night shift cashier needed. Gas depot off Y19. Same place. I almost wrote an anonymous warning to whoever took the job, but I didn't. Would they even believe me? Sometimes I think about going back, just to see if it was real. But then I remember that little boy's eyes, that whisper, that cold breath, and I stay far away. Story the end. I started working night shifts at a gas station outside Wichita in the fall of 2016. The place was barely a dot on the map. Just one of those old rundown stations with a flickering sign, 2 pumps, and a small shop that sold everything from coffee to fishing bait. My shift ran from 10 p.m. to 6 a.m., which meant I rarely saw anyone except for the occasional trucker or someone getting fuel before heading into town. It was quiet, easy money, and I liked the solitude. The station sat right off an old stretch of Route 54 that used to be busier before the newer highway got built. Now, people passed it by unless they were lost or low on gas. My coworker Jim had worked there for over 10 years and warned me about the night shift on my first day. I thought he was joking when he said, "Don't go near the back lot after 3 a.m., and if the pump rings but no one's there, don't go outside." He had this way of saying things that made you unsure if he was serious or just pulling your leg. I laughed it off, and he didn't push it, just nodded and told me to keep the doors locked after midnight. The first couple weeks were uneventful. I'd bring my laptop, watch movies, read, and occasionally ring someone up for gas or a pack of cigarettes. Sometimes I'd hear coyotes howling in the fields behind the station or see headlights in the distance that never seemed to get closer. Normal country night stuff. Then around the 3rd week, weird things started happening. It was just after 2:45 a.m. I was sitting behind the counter, drinking coffee and scrolling through my phone, when I heard the sound of a pump starting. One of those mechanical clicks followed by the slow whir of gas being drawn. I glanced up and saw that pump 2 was active. No car. I leaned forward and looked again. The pump was running, numbers rolling on the display, but there wasn't a vehicle there. Just the pump, sitting by itself in the glow of the overhead lights. The nozzle wasn't even removed from its holder. I walked around the counter, pressed my face to the glass, and squinted into the lot. Nothing. No movement. No wind. Just fog starting to roll in from the west, thick and slow like smoke from a campfire. I stepped outside, crunching over the gravel, and the moment my foot hit the ground, the pump stopped. I stood still, listening. The silence was deep, almost wrong. No crickets, no wind, just the sound of my own breath. I walked to the pump and checked it. Nothing unusual, no sign of tampering or malfunction. I chalked it up to a glitch, went back inside, and locked the door again. Over the next few nights, the same thing happened. Always the same pump. Always at around the same time. I'd hear it click on and start running even though no one was there. Once I saw the handle actually lift from the holster and hang in midair, swaying gently as if someone had just let go. I stopped going outside after that. I told Jim about it a few days later, trying to sound casual. He just nodded, didn't look surprised at all. "Used to be an old man who came through here every night back in the 80s, he said. Same time, same pump. Always paid cash. Never talked much, just filled up and left. One night he didn't come in. Turns out he died a few miles down the road. Ran his car into a ditch. They said he must have fallen asleep at the wheel. But folks around here swore they kept seeing him, especially near that pump." He didn't elaborate, just sipped his coffee and walked off. That should have been enough for me to quit. But I didn't. I don't know why. Maybe curiosity. Maybe I didn't want to admit it was getting under my skin. Things escalated the following week. It was a Thursday. I remember that clearly because Thursday was delivery night, and I'd spent the earlier part of my shift stocking shelves. Around 3:05 a.m., I heard the door chime ring. It startled me because I hadn't seen any headlights, hadn't heard any engine. But when I looked up, a man was walking in. He was tall, maybe mid-50s, wearing a denim jacket and a faded cap. His face was weathered, the kind of skin that looks like it's seen too many suns and too many winters. He didn't make eye contact, just walked straight to the fridge, opened it, and took out a bottle of orange juice. He came to the counter and set it down. "Cash or card?" I asked. He didn't answer, just pulled out a crumpled $5 bill and slid it over. I gave him change and waited for him to leave. But he didn't move, just stood there staring past me into the air. "You seen her yet?" he asked. "Who?" He didn't blink. "The girl. She comes around when it gets cold." I didn't know how to respond. Then he turned and left. When the door shut behind him, I stepped out to see where he'd gone. There were no cars in the lot, no taillights on the road. He had vanished. That night, I dreamed of a girl. She was standing outside the gas station, barefoot on the pavement, wearing a white nightgown that fluttered in the wind. Her eyes were wide and dark, like she'd been crying for days. She just kept staring through the glass, mouth moving like she was whispering. I woke up drenched in sweat. For the next few nights, I didn't sleep during the day. I stayed awake, alert and on edge. I started seeing things in the mirrors, faces that weren't mine, shadows that didn't belong to anything. Once, the security monitors all went to static at the same time, then flashed back on, showing the lot empty. Except for pump 2. The handle was hanging loose again, swaying like someone had just used it. And then came the knocking. It was around 3:30 a.m. on a particularly cold night. The fog was thick, pressing against the windows like a living thing. I was behind the counter when I heard 3 knocks at the back door, the one that led to the storage area. I froze. No one ever used that door, not even employees. It stayed locked at all times. I stood up and listened. Another knock, then a pause, then 3 more. I grabbed the flashlight and walked toward the back. Every hair on my body was standing up. When I reached the door, I looked through the tiny glass window. Nothing. I unlocked it and opened it slowly. A gust of cold air hit me in the face, thick with the smell of old smoke and gasoline, but no one was there. The lot was empty. No footprints. No wind. As I turned to go back inside, I saw it. A girl, standing by pump 2. She was young, maybe 10 or 11, with long black hair hanging over her face. She was wearing a dirty white dress, soaked and clinging to her small frame. Her head tilted to the side as she looked at me, and I swear to God her feet weren't touching the ground. I blinked, and she was gone. That broke me. I called Jim the next day and told him I couldn't do nights anymore. He didn't argue. "You saw her, didn't you?" he asked. I didn't answer. He told me a story. Back in the 90s, a girl had gone missing near the station. Her family's car had broken down late at night, and while her father walked to find help, she stayed behind. They said she was gone when he came back. No one found her body. But the father, he insisted she was taken, not lost. People thought he'd lost his mind. He moved away not long after. Locals whispered about her for years. Some said she showed up during foggy nights, asking for help. Others claimed they heard her crying by the back lot. I never took another shift after that. Eventually, I left the job altogether. But sometimes when I drive late at night and pass that lonely stretch of Route 54, I slow down as I pass the station. It's still there, still open, still flickering, and if the fog is thick enough, I swear I can see someone standing by pump 2. Story the end. It was the kind of gas station you wouldn't notice unless you needed to. Just off Highway 41, about 2 miles past a barely there town called Emory, it sat at a bend in the road surrounded by woods thick enough to block the sky. I first came across it back in 2016 on a solo drive from Chicago down to southern Georgia. I had taken a wrong turn and my GPS wasn't getting a signal. I figured I'd keep going until I found somewhere with a map or directions. That's when I saw the faded gas sign flickering above a half-lit canopy. It was close to midnight when I pulled in. The place looked like it hadn't been updated since the 80s, peeling green paint on the exterior, dusty windows, and a single pump. Still, the lights were on inside the building, and an open sign buzzed faintly in the window. I parked near the pump, got out, and stretched. The air smelled like pine and something else. Something musty, like damp basement walls. Crickets chirped loudly from the forest nearby, but I noticed something strange right away. There were no other cars around, no parked vehicles, no customers, and no attendant visible through the smudged glass door. I walked inside, the bell above the door jingling with a mechanical clunk. The place was dimly lit and eerily quiet. There was a single aisle of dusty snacks, old cans of motor oil, and a soda humming louder than it needed to. The counter was empty, though an old stool sat behind the register, slightly turned like someone had just gotten up. "Hello?" I called out. No response. I cleared my throat and called again. Still nothing. I glanced at the clock on the wall. The second hand wasn't moving. I wandered around the store for a minute before heading back toward the counter. I leaned on the bell, one of those little silver ones you tap. It let out a dull ring. That's when I heard a creaking sound coming from behind the door that led to what I assumed was the storage or office area. I waited, expecting someone to step out, but no one did. That's when I noticed the security monitor near the register. It displayed 4 grainy black and white views, one showing the pump outside, another pointing down the snack aisle, a third showing the back room, and the last displaying the register itself. I stared at the screen and something made my stomach drop. In the feed of the back room, a man stood completely still, facing the camera. He wasn't moving, not blinking, not shifting his weight. He was just there. Dressed in a pale blue uniform with a name tag that was too blurry to read. His eyes were fixed on the lens and his arms hung stiff at his sides. I whipped my head around toward the door to the back room. Still closed. I turned back to the monitor and the man was gone. My heart thudded painfully. I leaned over the counter, trying to make out more detail on the screen. I tapped the buttons beside it, but they didn't do anything. Suddenly, the bell over the front door jingled. I spun around. No one was there. I backed away from the counter and went to the door, looking out the glass. My car was still parked near the pump. Nothing else. Just trees and black road. I felt a prickle crawl across the back of my neck, like something was watching me. I turned slowly, and that's when I saw him. The man from the monitor. He was standing at the far end of the aisle, motionless. Same blue uniform. Same stiff posture. Only now I could see his face. His skin was pale, waxy. His eyes looked dead, milky, and glazed like he'd been submerged in water. His mouth was slightly open. I froze. He didn't move. Then, in one slow motion, he lifted a hand and pointed at me. I didn't think. I bolted out the door and sprinted to my car. I fumbled with the keys, dropped them, swore out loud, then got them back into my hand and finally jammed them into the ignition. The engine turned over slowly, like it didn't want to start. I looked up and saw the man was now outside the station, standing just a few feet from my car. There was no sound of the door opening, no footsteps, just there. He was pointing at me again. The car finally roared to life and I slammed it into reverse. Gravel sprayed as I sped backward, then I shifted into drive and tore out of the lot. I didn't look back. For a few miles, I was shaking, gripping the wheel like my life depended on it. When I finally got cell reception again, I called my friend back in Atlanta and asked him to look up the gas station on Highway 41 near Emory. He couldn't find anything. Said the only station near that stretch had been shut down years ago after a fire killed the overnight clerk. No one rebuilt it. I pulled over at a brightly lit Shell station an hour later and asked the cashier about it. She looked confused when I described it, then got quiet when I mentioned the guy in the blue uniform. "That sounds like old Miller's," she said cautiously. "But that place burned down in '97. The guy working that night, I think his name was Joel Miller. Poor man never made it out." I told her I was just there. She went pale and stepped back, muttering something about not bringing that kind of talk into her station. I didn't sleep well that night. A few months later, I was telling this story at a bar to a couple guys I'd just met during a work trip. One of them, a trucker, got real quiet when I mentioned the man on the security monitor. He said he'd seen him too. It had been years back when he was still new on the long-haul routes. He'd gotten lost late at night and stumbled onto the same gas station. Same dead lights, same silence inside. He didn't see the man in person, but caught a glimpse on the monitor just before the screen cut to static. He left without pumping gas. He said a few truckers had similar stories. The man always appears alone, sometimes on the monitor, sometimes in the aisle, but never moves, except to point. A couple years went by, and I mostly convinced myself it was stress, sleep deprivation, maybe even a hallucination. But then in 2020, during a road trip with my fiancée, we passed near Emory again. She was asleep, and I saw the familiar bend in the road. Curiosity got the better of me, so I turned off and headed down the same path. Only this time, there was nothing there, just an empty gravel lot swallowed by weeds. No pump, no canopy, no building, like it had never existed. I parked and got out, walking around the clearing. Nothing looked familiar, except one thing, a rusted gas pump handle half buried in the dirt. I reached down to touch it and instantly felt the air go cold, even though it was the middle of summer. A whisper floated through the trees, something indecipherable but deeply unsettling. I left. I didn't say a word about it to my fiancée. I still haven't. It's been almost a decade since that first night, but I still dream about that man. In my sleep, I see him watching me through that flickering monitor. I feel his eyes. I see his arm raised slowly to point. I never found out why. Why me? Why then? Or what the pointing means. But others have seen it. That gas station is gone now, maybe for good. But every so often I wonder if someone else, lost and desperate for gas, might stumble onto it the same way I did. And I wonder if the man in the blue uniform will be waiting for them. Story the end. The night I started working the graveyard shift at the gas station on Route 11, I thought I was in for an easy paycheck and quiet hours. It was a small town station, nestled between stretches of highway and farmland, with 2 rusted gas pumps out front and a convenience store that smelled of stale coffee and motor oil. The station was old, built sometime in the late 70s, maybe early 80s, and hadn't changed much since. The flickering neon sign buzzed incessantly, casting an eerie glow over the cracked concrete parking lot. The job itself was simple: manage the register, keep the shelves stocked, mop the floors, and make sure nobody caused trouble. There was usually little traffic after midnight, aside from a handful of truckers or locals passing through. I liked the solitude and the slow pace, but I quickly learned that the nights held something else entirely. On my third shift, about 2 hours after midnight, I was wiping down the counter when I heard the door chime. I looked up, expecting a customer, but the lot was empty. The lights outside were on, but no one was there. Shrugging it off, I turned back to my work. Then I heard the pumps start clicking, the mechanical noise of a pump turning on. I looked outside again, but there were no vehicles. The pump at number 2 was running, the meter ticking upwards like fuel was flowing, but the nozzle was still in its cradle. I walked outside, flashlight in hand, and checked the pump. It was off, no fuel leaking, but the meter still moved. I checked the other pumps. All were idle. I went back inside and flipped the breaker for the pumps off and on. The ticking stopped. The whole lot was silent again. That night, I kept the door locked after that and made sure the lights stayed on. But the next night was worse. At 2:17 a.m., the door chimes sounded again. I looked at the monitor, but no one was there. I got up and stepped outside. The air was cold, far colder than it should have been for early May. There, standing at pump number 3, was a woman. She wore a long, white dress that looked damp and torn. Her long black hair hung in front of her face, but I could see her pale skin shining in the moonlight. I called out to her, but she didn't move. I walked closer, and as I did, I realized something was wrong. Her feet didn't touch the ground. She hovered just above the concrete. I froze. Suddenly, the lights flickered and went out, plunging me into darkness. When they came back on a few seconds later, she was gone. I ran inside, locking the door behind me. The rest of the night passed in a blur. After that, strange things happened regularly. The old radio in the back room would turn on by itself, playing static or faint whispers. Footsteps echoed in the garage, even though it was locked and empty. Cold spots appeared near the pumps and the restroom. Once I found wet footprints leading from the back door to the middle of the store. They were small, like a child's, and disappeared suddenly. When I told the owner, a grizzled man named Joe, he just shook his head. "That place has always been haunted," he said. Back in '82, a family got stranded out here during a storm. The mother and daughter never made it. Folks say they still wander the lot, looking for help. One night, around 3 a.m., the woman appeared inside the store. She stood near the snack aisle, looking around like she was searching for something. Her eyes were black voids, and her mouth hung open in a silent scream. I screamed and ran out the back door, never returning to work there again. Years later, I still drive past that station sometimes. I never stop, but I always see the flickering lights and the faint shape of a woman standing at pump 3. Waiting. Story the end. I started working at the Pine Grove 24-hour fuel mart in late October of 2014. It was about 15 miles off the main highway, nestled between a dying lumber town and an abandoned rail station that hadn't seen use in decades. The gas station had been around since the 1960s, or so I was told, and it looked the part. Yellowed ceiling tiles, humming soda fridges, and faded signage that hadn't been replaced since I was a kid. The manager, Deb, hired me on the spot after I told her I didn't mind overnight shifts. I needed the money. Rent was overdue, and my only other option was temp warehouse work out in Clintonville. She warned me the graveyard shift could be strange. Not busy, just strange. Her words, not mine. I laughed it off. I'd worked in retail before. Nothing surprises you after a few years dealing with the public. I figured she meant the occasional drifter or the usual town weirdos, and I could handle that. The first 2 weeks were uneventful. Most of my time was spent cleaning, checking expiration dates, and scanning the occasional trucker who stopped in for coffee and a smoke. The regulars were predictable. There was Marvin, a guy in his 60s who pumped $10 of gas every night around 1 a.m. sharp and never spoke. A young woman who came in with a crying baby strapped to her chest, usually just buying diapers and a pack of gum. And then there were the random late-night passersby, some polite, some silent, some clearly high. But things shifted around the third week. It started with the knocking. The first night it happened, I thought it was someone at the front doors. The station had double glass doors that stayed locked after midnight. I heard 3 quick knocks, sharp and distinct. I looked up from the counter. No one was there. I got up and checked outside. The parking lot was empty. No cars. No footsteps in the gravel. I stood there for a few seconds, squinting out into the dark. The security lights only lit so far. Beyond that, it was just black woods. Then I heard it again. 3 knocks. But this time, they came from the side of the building, the wall near the storage room. It didn't make sense. There was no walkway on that side, just a narrow strip of grass and weeds and a rusted fence beyond it. I grabbed the flashlight from behind the counter and went outside. I circled the building, sweeping the beam along the siding. Nothing. I chalked it up to old pipes or wind, went back inside and tried not to think about it. But it happened again the next night, around 2:45 a.m. like clockwork. This time the knocking came from the back door, the heavy steel door that led to the trash bins and storage shed. I was refilling the coffee machine when I heard it. 3 knocks. I froze. My stomach tightened. I waited, holding my breath. It came again. Slow. Deliberate. Not pounding, just enough to say, I'm here. I walked back there and stood about 6 feet from the door. There's no window on that one. Just solid metal. I didn't open it. I waited, flashlight in hand. Then it stopped. When the sun came up, I checked the security footage. The cameras out back had glitched for exactly 1 minute and 30 seconds at the same time I heard the knocking. Static. Then the feed resumed like nothing happened. I told Deb about it later that day. She didn't laugh. In fact, she seemed to be expecting it. You didn't open the door, did you? She asked. No, I said. Should I have? Good, she replied, avoiding my eyes. Sometimes folks get curious, then they quit. That was all she said. The following night, things escalated. It was cold, mid-30s. I had just finished cleaning the bathrooms when I saw movement on the monitors. One of the outside pumps flickered to life. It was pump 4, the farthest from the store, and usually the last one to get used. The screen showed a car pulled up, an old Buick, maybe late 80s model. No one got out. It just sat there, lights off. After a full minute, I radioed out through the intercom system. You okay out there? No response. I watched, waiting. Finally, the driver's side door creaked open. A woman stepped out. She had on a long, dark dress, like something from another time, and her hair was pulled back tightly. Her face was pale, too pale, and I remember thinking her expression didn't change at all as she walked toward the store. But she didn't come inside. She stood at the door, looking in. Not knocking, not moving, just staring. I stood up and moved around the counter to get a better view. I didn't want to open the doors. Something in me knew better. She raised one hand slowly and placed her palm flat against the glass. I couldn't explain it, but a wave of pressure hit me, like the air inside the store got heavier. I could feel my own heartbeat slow. The temperature dropped. I saw my breath, and then she smiled. It wasn't warm. It was stretched, unnatural, like her mouth was pulling too far across her face. Then, just as suddenly, she turned and walked back to the Buick. She got in, the car started, and she drove off. When I checked the pumps later, Pump 4 hadn't registered any transaction. No gas dispensed. No record of the car. I tried to tell myself I imagined it. Sleep deprivation, maybe. Stress. But it didn't stop there. Over the next several nights, I heard more knocking, always from different places. Sometimes it was the roof, sometimes the walk-in cooler. Once, I swear I heard it coming from the floor beneath the counter. I started seeing things in the reflection of the cooler doors. Movement behind me, even when I was alone. Pale shapes, dark eyes, shadows that didn't belong. One night, around 3 a.m., the power cut out. Total darkness. I grabbed the emergency flashlight and tried to reset the breaker. As I opened the door to the back room, the temperature dropped instantly. My breath fogged up, the flashlight flickered, and then I saw something in the far corner of the room. Crouched low, facing the wall. It wasn't moving, just crouched. I stood, frozen. Then it turned. I didn't see a face, just darkness where a face should have been. Like the light didn't touch it. 2 glints where eyes should be. It stood slowly, impossibly tall, and took a single step toward me. I slammed the door and ran. The power came back 5 minutes later on its own. I never opened that back room again unless the sun was up. I didn't tell Deb that time. I didn't want her to confirm whatever I was starting to believe. But I knew I wasn't imagining it. I could feel it, that something had taken root in that place, deep and old. My final night came the week before Thanksgiving. It started like any other, quiet, cold. I was jumpy, watching every monitor closely. Around 3:12 a.m., I noticed movement by the dumpsters out back. The camera showed someone standing near the trash, shoulders hunched, head down. I thought maybe it was a drunk or a homeless guy. Then he looked up at the camera. His face was blank. Not expressionless. Blank. Like someone had erased the features. Just skin, stretched tight. He turned and started walking toward the back door. I ran and locked it, heart slamming in my chest. The knocking came immediately. 3 times. Then again. Then again. I didn't move, didn't breathe. Then I heard the front door chime. I whipped around. The doors were still locked. No one had opened them, but the chime went off again. Then again, like someone walking in, one after the other. I stared at the space in front of the counter. Empty. The cooler doors started to fog up. The temperature dropped rapidly. Every monitor went to static. And then I heard whispering. Everywhere. Above me. Behind me. Inside the walls. My name. Over and over. Michael. I don't know how I got through the rest of that shift. I stayed behind the counter, holding the flashlight and a tire iron I kept under the register. When the sun finally rose, everything stopped. The monitors came back. The fog cleared. Chime went silent. I walked out without clocking out. I quit that day. Never went back. A few months later, I passed through town and saw the station boarded up. Someone said it had closed after a break-in. But I didn't see any signs of vandalism. Just dark windows and a sagging roof. I still dream about it sometimes. The knocking, the blank face, the woman in the dark dress. And when I wake up, sometimes I hear the chime of a door opening. But there's no door in my bedroom. Story, the end. It was one of those suffocatingly quiet nights in late September when the air hung heavy and motionless, and the usual highway breeze felt like it had gone to sleep. I was working the night shift at a gas station just off Highway 18, a 2-pump spot that hadn't been updated since the early 90s. The place looked like it had been dipped in dust and forgotten. Flickering neon lights buzzed overhead, and only one of the 2 pumps worked, though the owner, Mr. Glenn, hadn't bothered to fix it in months. I was 24 at the time, recently moved to a town called Dry Creek. It was one of those towns that had a post office, a diner, and a bar, and not much else. I didn't mind, though. I wanted quiet. I'd been through a breakup and left behind a miserable apartment in the city. The job at the gas station was easy, boring, and paid just enough for me to rent a room above the hardware store. On this particular night, I remember everything so clearly. It started with the radio fuzzing in and out. I'd been listening to one of the only stations I could pick up, an oldies station out of Clearfield, when the static kicked in. I thought maybe it was a storm coming, but the sky was clear and the forecast had been dry all week. It was a little after 1 a.m. when the lights at the pump cut out. That wasn't unusual. They were old, and sometimes they just died for no reason. I went outside to tap the breaker box on the side of the building, which usually did the trick. As I stepped out into the humid night, I noticed how unusually still it was. No wind, no cars, not even a cricket, just this thick silence that made my skin crawl. I slapped the metal panel and the lights blinked back on. The moment they did, I heard a ding from the shop door behind me, the sound it made when someone entered. I turned, but when I looked through the glass, no one was there. I went inside and looked around. The place was small, just a few aisles of snacks, a tiny fridge with sodas, and a counter with the register. There was nowhere someone could really hide. I checked the back room just to be sure. Empty. I chalked it up to the door sensor acting up, but the sense of unease didn't leave. I went back behind the counter, trying to focus on my crossword. About 10 minutes later, I caught movement on the CCTV monitor. There was someone standing at pump 1. At first, I was relieved. A customer meant something to do. But as I looked closer, something felt wrong. The figure wasn't moving. They were just standing there, right next to the pump, facing the building. The image was grainy and black and white, but I could make out that it was a man. Tall, maybe in his 40s or 50s, wearing a long coat or something similar, but he just stood there, didn't move, didn't look around. I picked up the mic and clicked the intercom. "Need any help out there?" I said, trying to sound casual. No response. The man didn't move. I leaned closer to the monitor. He was still standing in the exact same position, almost like a statue. My stomach tightened. I got up and went to the door. I looked outside, squinting into the darkness, but there was no one at the pump. Confused, I walked out again, stepping carefully across the gravel. I circled the pump. No sign of anyone. I looked down the highway, nothing but empty road disappearing into the horizon both ways. I went back inside and stared at the monitor, still showing the man at the pump. I blinked and rubbed my eyes. The screen was fuzzy now, with static dancing at the edges. Then it cut to black. When it came back on, the man was gone. I sat down, heart thudding a little faster than before. I didn't like this. Something was off. I told myself it was a glitch, probably an old recording or some kind of interference. But I couldn't stop thinking about how still the figure had been, how unnatural it looked. I tried calling Mr. Glenn to ask if the cameras had been doing this before, but his phone rang and rang without answer. I thought about calling the cops, but what would I even say? Another hour passed, and I tried to focus on restocking the cigarette shelves. I kept glancing back at the monitor every few seconds, just in case. At 2:37 a.m., the door dinged again. I turned around immediately. This time a woman was standing there, mid-30s, thin, wearing a pale green dress that looked like something from the 70s. Her hair was long and damp like she'd been walking in the rain, but there hadn't been any rain in days. She looked off. Her eyes were wide, almost too wide, and her face was pale as chalk. "Good evening," I said, forcing a smile. She didn't reply, just stared. I stood there for a moment, unsure what to do. "Can I help you?" I asked. Still nothing. She started walking slowly down one of the aisles, her eyes scanning the shelves like she was looking for something that wasn't there. I couldn't hear her footsteps. It was like she floated. She moved past the snack section toward the back where the drinks were, then turned the corner out of sight. I walked slowly to the end of the aisle, leaning around to see where she'd gone. No one was there. I rushed to the back room, empty. There was no exit door, no windows large enough for someone to climb through. I checked the entire store in a panic. Nothing. She was gone. I locked the front door after that. I wasn't supposed to, but I didn't care. My hands were shaking. I tried to convince myself I was imagining things, that maybe I was tired. But then something happened I couldn't explain away. At 3:12 a.m., the smell started. It was subtle at first, like something wet and rotting. It crept in like a fog until the entire store reeked. I checked the trash, the fridge, the bathroom. Nothing. The smell wasn't coming from anything physical. And then the lights started flickering again. One by one, each aisle light blinked out with a quiet pop until the store was dim, except for the buzzing over the register. I grabbed the flashlight from under the counter. Just as I flicked it on, the radio, which had been silent for over an hour, came back with a burst of static. Then a voice, not a song, not a DJ, Just a low, slow voice whispering something I couldn't understand. I leaned close. It was repeating the same sentence, over and over. They never leave. They never leave. They never leave. I ripped the plug from the radio. The whispering continued for another full minute before fading out on its own. I called the police. I didn't care if they thought I was nuts. I told them someone was breaking in and messing with the equipment, maybe on drugs, maybe dangerous. They said they'd send a unit. While I waited, I stood behind the counter, gripping the flashlight like a weapon. I kept watching the monitor. At 3:46 a.m., the man came back. Same figure, same coat, standing at the pump. But this time he wasn't alone. The woman in the green dress was behind him. Both of them stood perfectly still, facing the building. I could barely breathe. The police car pulled up at 4:05 a.m. The headlights swept over the lot. I ran out to meet the officer, trying not to sound like a lunatic as I explained what happened. He looked skeptical but agreed to check the property. We walked around together, checking the pump, the lot, the back of the building. Nothing. I brought him inside, showed him the monitor. It was blank. No footage, no image, just a black screen. He shrugged, said it was probably just exhaustion messing with my head, told me to get some rest. He left not long after. I didn't sleep that morning or the next. I kept thinking about how real they looked, how heavy the air had felt, how the smell still clung faintly to my clothes. I tried to forget about it, told myself I was cracking under the pressure of isolation and long hours. But then, 3 weeks later, I found out about the fire. I was talking to an old guy who used to drive through Dry Creek back in the 80s. He said the gas station had once been bigger, had a diner attached to it, burned down in 1982. A couple had died in the fire, a man and a woman. He said the woman had worked there, the man was her boyfriend. He'd tried to save her but got trapped inside. No one made it out. They were never buried here. Their bodies were found too late, too charred, cremated. No service. I found the article in an old newspaper archive. It had a picture, grainy, faded. The man in the photo was the same man from the pump. The woman was wearing that same green dress. I quit the job not long after that, moved out of Dry Creek, and never went back. But sometimes when I drive late at night and pass an old gas station, I feel it again, that heavy stillness, like the air is holding its breath, like someone's watching from the dark. And once, just once, I thought I saw her again, in the rearview mirror, standing by the side of the road, waiting. Story the end. I got the job at a small gas station off Route 76, about 20 miles outside of a town barely anyone had heard of. It was the kind of place truckers pulled into for a quick fill-up or a cup of burnt coffee before moving on. The station wasn't connected to any major chain, just an old family-owned business run by a guy named Ed who'd inherited it from his dad and never bothered modernizing it. Everything inside looked like it hadn't been touched since the 80s. The tile floor was stained and cracked, the walls smelled like motor oil and mildew, and the cooler buzzed like a dying fly. Ed hired me without much of an interview. He needed someone to cover the overnight shift from 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. Said it was slow and easy, mostly just sitting around unless a trucker pulled in or someone needed a smoke. He handed me a set of keys, pointed out the mop closet, the coffee machine, and the security cameras, and left me there that first night. For the first few shifts, he was right. It was dead quiet. Maybe 2 or 3 customers over 8 hours. Most of the time, I sat behind the counter reading or scrolling through my phone. Occasionally, I'd sweep the floor or restock the cooler. It wasn't glamorous, but it paid better than most local jobs. About 2 weeks in, I started to notice something weird. Every night, between 3:30 and 4, the pump closest to the road, pump 4, would activate. The screen would light up, the motor would kick on, and the system would beep like someone had picked up the handle. But every time I looked out the window, there was no car. Nothing at all. Just the pump humming in the dark, spitting out 0 gallons and racking up $0. The first time it happened, I figured it was a glitch. Ed hadn't updated anything in the place in decades, so maybe the wiring was just shot. But it happened again and again. Same pump, same time, no vehicle. I mentioned it to Ed one morning when he came in for the shift change. "Pump 4?" he asked, not looking at me. He was fiddling with the register drawer like he hadn't heard right. Yeah, I said. It turns on around 3:30 every night, but nobody's there. He didn't say anything for a second, then muttered something like, just ignore it. That one's always been funny. That didn't sit right with me. Something in his tone, something in the way he didn't look up, like he didn't want to talk about it. I let it go, but the next night I watched the cameras more closely. The external one showed the entire parking lot, including pump 4. Just after 3:30, the screen flickered slightly, and the pump kicked on. The camera didn't show anything unusual. The pump lit up like it had been used, but the area was completely empty. I went outside to look. It was colder than usual, and the night was dead silent, except for the buzzing from the overhead lights. I walked up to pump 4. It was definitely on. The screen begin fueling, and the handle was resting back in place like nobody had touched it. But I noticed something that chilled me. The concrete under the pump was wet, not soaked, not puddled, just damp, like someone had spilled a bit of gas or water. But it hadn't rained in days, and the other pumps were dry. I backed away, went inside, and reset the pump manually from the register. But I didn't sleep well the next day. The next night, the same thing happened. 3:36 a.m. Pump 4 lit up, activated on its own, screen glowing, motor humming. This time I watched the footage as it happened, and my stomach turned. There was a flicker, a split-second disruption in the footage, and during that moment, something showed up. A figure. It was only there for one frame, maybe two, but I saw it, tall, thin, and hunched, like someone standing at the pump in a heavy coat, or maybe soaked clothes. Their face was obscured, and they stood absolutely still. The next frame, they were gone, and the pump was lit up again. I paused and rewound the tape at least a dozen times, but the figure only flashed once. It felt like a blink, like a hallucination caught on camera. I didn't tell Ed. Instead, I started paying attention to the area around the pump. During the day, it looked normal. At night, it started to feel wrong. The light above pump 4 flickered more than the others. Sometimes, when I walked by it, the hair on my arms would stand up. Once or twice, I thought I heard whispering. One night, about a month into the job, I was behind the counter watching the monitors. Just after 3:30, pump 4 activated like clockwork. I stood up and leaned closer to the screen. The camera flickered, and again the figure appeared. But this time, it didn't vanish. The figure stood motionless by the pump. I stared at the screen in disbelief, unable to move. It wasn't a car, wasn't a customer. Just a tall, dark shape, dripping wet, staring toward the store. Then it started walking. Not fast, not aggressive, just a slow, steady movement toward the door. I looked up from the monitor to the front windows. Nothing was there. I looked back at the monitor. The figure was now just a few steps from the entrance. But in real life, there was no one, no sound, no shadow. I felt ice crawl through my chest. The door didn't open, no chime. But the camera showed the figure now inside the store, walking slowly down aisle 2. I turned in my chair. The aisles were empty. Completely, totally empty. Then behind me I heard it. A soft, wet sound, like dripping water. I turned back to the monitor. The figure was gone. I stood up, trembling, and walked the store. Every aisle, every corner, nothing. But I followed the sound of dripping to the back corner, near the supply closet. There on the floor was a small puddle, just a few inches across, no leak above, nothing spilled, but it smelled like brackish water, like a pond or swamp. I wiped it up and went back to the counter, heart pounding. I couldn't explain it. Still can't. But the worst came a few nights later. It was a Sunday, dead quiet. No trucks, no customers, just me, the flickering lights, and the buzz of the cooler. 3:36 a.m., pump 4 activated. I didn't even bother checking the cameras this time. I stayed put, gripping the counter, trying to calm my breathing. Then I heard the door chime. My heart stopped. I looked up. No one was there, but the chime had gone off. That mechanical ding-ding sound. It only happened when the glass door opened. I checked the monitor. No one, just the same empty aisles. Then, from somewhere behind me, I heard footsteps. Not fast, not loud, just steady. I froze. I couldn't bring myself to turn around. The footsteps stopped. I turned slowly. Nothing. But the air behind the counter was suddenly cold, like I'd opened a freezer. My breath fogged in the air. Then I heard the whisper, right next to my ear. I didn't finish. I ran outside, jumped into my car, and didn't stop until I was 5 miles down the road. I called Ed from the side of the highway, told him I was done. He didn't sound surprised. He didn't even ask why, just said, "Okay, I'll mail your last check." A few months later, I heard the station close down. Ed sold the property to some chain that planned to tear it down and build a new one, but they never did. Every time I drive past it, which I avoid as much as possible, the old station is still there, empty, decaying, and overgrown. The sign out front still says, "Open 24 hours," even though no one's worked there in years. And sometimes when I pass late at night, I swear I still see the glow of Pump 4, lit up, waiting for a customer that never comes, or maybe for one that already did. Story the end. There's a stretch of Highway 191 in Arizona that winds through nothing but open desert, brittle shrubs, and ancient rocks scorched by the sun. If you've ever driven it at night, you know how lonely that road gets. No lights, no houses, just blackness and silence. I took a job out there during a rough patch in my life, working the graveyard shift at a gas station near the Navajo Reservation, about 45 miles from the nearest real town. Everyone just called it Carmichael's, though I never met anyone named Carmichael, and the actual sign on the storefront had long since faded into nothing more than a weather-stained rectangle above the door. I started in September. I just turned 30 and had recently left Phoenix after a breakup that sent me into a downward spiral, quitting my job, sleeping in my truck, drinking too much. My cousin Tony got me the gig and said the place was always hiring because no one stuck around long. When I pulled up for my first shift, the place looked like something out of a forgotten time. A single row of pumps under a rusted metal awning, a building with yellowing windows, and a small side structure that used to be a garage but now housed stacks of discarded tires and busted coolers. It was late afternoon, the sky already turning orange, and the desert wind blew fine sand against the doors with a whispering hiss. The man I was replacing was named Glenn, older guy, wore thick glasses and chain smoked like it was the only thing keeping him alive. He gave me a quick run-through. Lock the doors at midnight, even though the sign said 24 hours, restock the drinks, keep the register drawer balanced, and don't go out back after dark. I laughed at that last part. He didn't. "I mean it," he said, not looking up from his clipboard. "You hear anything out behind the dumpster, just leave it be. Don't open the back door for anyone. Not unless you see headlights." I stared at him, waiting for the punchline, but he just handed me the keys and left. That first night passed quietly enough. A few late-night drivers, one trucker who slept in his cab for a while, and a group of teens in a beat-up Ford who bought beer even though I carded them and knew it was fake. I let it slide. I didn't care. I was just trying to get through the night without thinking too hard. But sometime around 2 a.m., I heard a knock on the back door. It wasn't loud, more like a soft tapping, 3 short raps like someone knocking politely with the tips of their fingers. I froze. There were no headlights, no cars. The only vehicle on the property was mine, parked under a flickering lamp near the front. I waited. Another knock. I remembered what Glenn said and decided it wasn't worth checking. I went back to cleaning the coffee machine, trying to convince myself it was the wind or maybe the building settling. But I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was out there. Around 3:15, the power blinked out, just for a second. The lights dimmed, the cooler hummed down, and the security monitor went dark. Then everything came back on like nothing happened. I checked the monitor feed. Nothing looked out of place. But when I glanced at the coffee machine, I noticed something weird. The glass carafe, which I just washed and left on the drying rack, was back in the machine. It was filled with black coffee, still steaming. I hadn't made any. I stood there for a while, unsure what to do. I poured it out in the sink and checked the breaker panel, which was fine. Maybe I'd zoned out, maybe I'd forgotten. That's what I told myself, but deep down something felt wrong, like the station had shifted, like I wasn't alone anymore. The next day, I asked Glenn if he ever had issues with the power. He just stared at me with this hollow look and said, "You're not the first person to see things here. You won't be the last." That wasn't comforting. The second week, I began noticing the same white sedan passing by the station every night at 3:27 a.m. I marked the time out of boredom one night and then started tracking it. Every night, like same make and model, same speed, same direction. Never stopped, never slowed down. Just that ghost white car slipping past the pumps and vanishing into the dark. One night I stood outside and watched as it approached. The headlights seemed dim, like they were behind a fog that wasn't really there. As it passed, I tried to see inside. The driver's seat looked empty, so did the rest of the car, and yet it drove straight, steady as a heartbeat. I told myself I was imagining it, that the desert plays tricks on you. Heat warps the mind, and isolation warps it worse. But then came the woman. She showed up around Halloween. It was a slow night, clear sky, full moon hanging like a bulb over the horizon. She walked in without making a sound. No chime from the bell above the door, no footsteps, just appeared between the drink fridge and the jerky rack. She wore a long, dust-colored dress. Her hair was dark, braided tight, hanging down her back. I said hello, trying not to seem startled. She didn't respond. Instead, she walked to the counter and placed a small, folded piece of cloth in front of me. I didn't recognize the fabric, brown, old, rough like burlap. There was something wrapped inside. I hesitated. "What's this?" I asked. She just stared. Then she whispered, barely loud enough to hear, "He buried them out back." I unwrapped the cloth. Inside were 3 small, cracked teeth. Human. Yellowed. One had a silver filling. I stumbled back, heart racing. When I looked up, she was gone. Not just walked out, gone. Like she'd blinked out of existence. The door hadn't opened, no motion on the camera, nothing. I checked the footage. At the exact moment she would have appeared, the screen turned black for 2 minutes. When it came back, I was alone at the counter, staring at the cloth. The next day I went out back. The dumpster sat crooked on a cracked slab of concrete. The surrounding lot was gravel and hard-packed dirt. I circled it, not sure what I was even looking for. Then I saw it. Behind the dumpster, half hidden under a tumbleweed, was a patch of disturbed earth. The gravel was scattered. The dirt uneven. Something had been dug up or buried. I didn't have a shovel, so I used an old tire iron to poke around. About a foot down, I hit something hard. I kept digging. Eventually, I uncovered a small, rusted metal box. The latch had corroded, but I forced it open. Inside were photographs. Black and white, curled at the edges. Most were of children, some smiling, some looking straight at the camera with blank expressions. One showed a girl standing in front of this very gas station, holding a balloon. Her eyes had been scratched out. At the bottom of the box was a leather wallet. Inside was a faded ID belonging to a man named Dennis Myers. I looked him up later. He'd gone missing in 1991. His truck was found abandoned on Highway 191. The last place he was seen? Carmichael's gas station. I didn't call the cops. I don't know why. Maybe because I knew they wouldn't find anything. Maybe because I knew this place wasn't something they could handle. Or maybe because, deep down, I was scared they'd find more than I wanted to know. After that night, the station changed. The air inside grew heavier, like walking through syrup. I'd catch glimpses of people in the reflection of the cooler doors, but when I turned, no one was there. I'd hear footsteps in the storage room, dragging slowly across the floor. Glenn quit a few weeks later. Left a note that said only, "She's watching. Don't look in the mirror after 3 a.m." I didn't believe him. Until I did. It was mid-November, around 3:30 a.m. I was cleaning the restroom mirror, something I rarely did, but I'd spilled some cleaner and figured I'd finish the job. The lights flickered as I wiped the glass, and for a second, my reflection didn't move. I stared, frozen. My reflection was still wiping the mirror, even after I'd stopped. Then it smiled. Not a big grin, just a slow, deliberate curl of the lips that didn't match the terror I felt in my own body. I ran out of that bathroom and didn't go back for the rest of the shift. The next morning, I told Tony I was done. He didn't argue, just nodded, like he'd been waiting for it. Before I left, I went back one last time. I took the teeth and the box of photos and drove out into the desert. I buried them under a Joshua tree and said a few words I didn't really believe. I don't know why I did it. Maybe I hoped it would put something to rest. That gas station is still there, though I heard it's under new management. They painted the front and fixed the lights. But I wonder if they know. I wonder if, late at night, they ever hear the tapping at the back door. Or see the white sedan pass by with no one behind the wheel. Or maybe they've met the woman in the dress, and maybe she's told them what she told me, that something was buried there, in the dirt behind Carmichael's, and that not everything buried stays dead. Story the end. It was late 2018 when I took a job as the night shift cashier at a gas station on the outskirts of a dying town in Arkansas. The name of the town doesn't matter. You wouldn't have heard of it. Just another spot on the map that people drive through without stopping unless their tank is empty or their bladder is full. The gas station was one of those lone outposts, a flickering beacon in the middle of nowhere, surrounded by woods on one side and the long stretch of empty highway on the other. No restaurants, no houses nearby, just pine trees, cracked asphalt, and a couple of broken down trucks rusting behind the dumpster. I needed the job. I just dropped out of college and was crashing at my cousin's trailer. Bills were piling up, and I wasn't in the mood to explain myself to family or go back home. So when I saw the "Help Wanted" sign taped to the front window, I walked in and got hired on the spot. My manager, a middle-aged woman named Cheryl, was as burnt out as the coffee she brewed. She barely looked at me when she handed me the keys to the register. "Keep the place clean. Don't let the drunks hang around. And if anyone asks about the freezer, tell them it's out of order," she said. No explanation beyond that. Just a muttered, "Good luck," and she walked out the back door without another word. At first, the job was dull, the kind of quiet that gets under your skin. My first few nights were all the same, mopping floors, wiping down shelves, and staring at the security monitors that glitched every time the wind picked up. I'd get the occasional customer, truckers, folks lost on their way through, but they never stayed long. No one wanted to linger. I thought I'd imagined it the first time it happened. It was around 3:15 a.m. I remember because I was watching the clock, counting down to sunrise. I heard what sounded like footsteps coming from the back storage room, slow and deliberate, crunching slightly like someone walking across gravel or broken glass. I figured it might have been a raccoon or maybe even Cheryl coming in to restock. I called out, "Hey, anyone back there?" No answer. I grabbed the flashlight and pushed the back door open. The air was cold and still. The light flickered above the walk-in freezer door, which I'd been told not to open. There was no sound anymore, just the low hum of the generator. I stepped closer and saw the faintest outline of a footprint in the dust. It wasn't a shoe print. It was bare, small, and oddly shaped, as if the toes were too long and the heel was too narrow. It gave me a chill. I backed out, locked the back door, and told myself it was probably just an old mark left by someone months ago. But it happened again the next night. Around the same time, I heard the footsteps. This time they were followed by a soft knocking sound, 3 soft taps, then silence, then 3 more. I checked the cameras. Nothing. The knocking continued for another 10 minutes, spaced out every few minutes like someone was patiently waiting to be let in. I didn't go back there that time. I stayed behind the counter and turned the radio up. On the 3rd night, the power went out. Total darkness. No wind, no thunder, no storm, just snap, and the lights cut. The only illumination was from the cigarette display behind me. I fumbled for my phone, turned on the flashlight, and moved toward the breaker box near the restroom. As I passed the snack aisle, I heard breathing. Not mine. Something ragged, wet, almost wheezing. I turned the light toward the aisle, but it was empty. That's when I saw the freezer door was open. I froze. Cheryl had locked it the first day I worked there. It was a thick industrial thing, the kind you couldn't open without a key. But now it stood ajar, and a faint mist curled out from it like fog rolling off a cold lake. I should have run. I should have called someone. But curiosity got the better of me. I stepped closer, peering into the darkness of the freezer. It wasn't empty. In the far corner, I saw something huddled, small, child-sized, crouched low like an animal. My flashlight flickered, and for a split second I saw its face. It wasn't a child. Its eyes were too large, sunken deep into its skull. Its skin looked stretched and gray, like wet paper, and its mouth hung open, showing rows of small, crooked teeth. It blinked slowly, like it wasn't surprised to see me. I slammed the freezer door and shoved a mop handle through the latch to keep it shut. Then I ran to the front and sat behind the counter until the lights came back on. When Cheryl came in at 6 a.m., I told her what I saw. She didn't even flinch, just poured herself a cup of coffee and sat on one of the milk crates. "It doesn't like the light," she said after a long pause. "It only comes out when the power fails or when someone opens that damn door." "What the hell is it?" I asked, still shaking. "I don't know, but it's been here longer than I have, longer than this station's been open. She told me the freezer used to be part of an old butcher shop that stood on the same property in the 50s. Before the gas station, there was a small market here, family-owned, until one winter when the owner's youngest daughter disappeared. They found her coat behind the store near the woods, but never found her body. A few weeks later, the butcher closed down. No explanation. Locals whispered about strange happenings, animals turning up dead, voices in the trees. When the gas station was built in the 80s, they kept the freezer because it was still functional. But weird things kept happening. Employees quit suddenly, power outages became common, and sometimes things were found in the dumpster. Bones, scraps of skin, always blamed on strays or wildlife. I should have told you, Cheryl said, lighting a cigarette with trembling fingers, but most people don't last more than a few nights anyway. I wanted to quit right then and there, but something held me back. Maybe it was the fact that no one else would believe me. Maybe I wanted to know what it was. Whatever it was, I kept working there for another few weeks. I started to notice patterns. The footsteps always came around the same time, between 3:10 and 3:25 a.m. The freezer door only opened when the power flickered or cut completely, and it always started with the same 3 knocks. Always 3. One night, I decided to record it. I set up my phone on the counter and left the screen recording on. Sure enough, at exactly 3:17 a.m., the knocking began. The sound was faint but clear. Tap, tap, tap. Then silence. Then again. Tap, tap, tap. But when I reviewed the footage the next day, the knocking wasn't there. Just silence. But there was something else. At the moment of the third set of knocks, the camera shook slightly as if someone had bumped the counter, and for half a second something moved past the aisle. Just a blur, gray and low to the ground. I showed Cheryl. She paled. "It's getting bolder," she said. "It used to stay in the freezer." I asked her why she didn't just get rid of the thing. Burn it, salt the ground, whatever people did in movies. But she just looked at me and said, "You think no one's tried? That thing? It's part of the land now." 2 days later, Cheryl didn't show up for her shift. Her car was found idling behind the station, driver's door open, headlights still on. Her purse was on the front seat, but she was gone. They called in search dogs. They scoured the woods for 3 days. Nothing. The only thing they found was a trail of wet footprints leading from the back door to the edge of the forest. Bare, small, oddly shaped. That was the last night I worked there. I packed my things the next morning and left town without saying goodbye to anyone. I heard later that the station shut down for renovations. But if you drive past on certain nights, you'll still see the light flickering in the back and the outline of the old freezer through the dirty window. And if you stop even for a second, they say you can hear it. The knocking. Always 3 times. Story the end. The highway was nearly empty as I drove east that night. It was the kind of road you took when you wanted to get somewhere fast, with few exits and almost no places to stop. But after 5 hours behind the wheel, my eyes felt heavy, and my grip on the steering wheel loosened with exhaustion. I was somewhere in rural Pennsylvania, a stretch of highway lined by thick forest and the occasional clearing where the moonlight barely reached the road. My gas gauge was flirting dangerously close to empty. I needed a break, and I needed fuel. When the first sign appeared, I almost didn't believe it. The glowing green letters flickered erratically in the darkness. Harrington's Gas, open 24 hours. I hadn't seen a station for miles. I didn't remember any service areas on this part of the highway. Still, the tiredness was pressing in, and the promise of coffee was enough to make me turn off the highway. The gas station looked like it had been there for decades. The brick facade was cracked and faded, the paint peeling in spots, and the overhead lights buzzed weakly. The pumps sat under a rusted canopy, some with broken glass panels, but the station itself looked open. The door was propped ajar. Inside, the fluorescent lights were flickering, but still illuminating the cramped space filled with stale air. The smell was a heavy mix of gasoline, mildew, and something I couldn't quite place. Something old and sour. The shelves were sparse, mostly empty, with dust settled thick on canned goods and snack wrappers. There was a counter at the back, with a solitary figure slumped behind it. I cleared my throat. "Hello?" No response. I walked closer. The man behind the counter was elderly, maybe in his 70s. His clothes were stained and worn, and his eyes were glassy but sharp when he finally looked up at me. There was a strange intensity in them. He didn't smile, didn't greet me. Instead, he just pointed to a pump outside. "I'll take $20 on pump 2, I said, fishing out cash from my wallet. He nodded slowly but didn't move from his seat. His voice was cracked when he finally spoke. "Cash only." I handed over the bills. He counted them carefully, then shuffled a paper receipt toward me. I stepped outside and pulled up to pump 2. The gas pump was ancient, with a cracked digital display and a nozzle that squeaked when I lifted it. The station's worn concrete cracked underfoot. As the fuel tank filled, I noticed the silence around me. No crickets, no hum of distant traffic, just an eerie stillness that felt like it was pressing against my skin. Suddenly, the overhead lights flickered and went out. The canopy was plunged into darkness except for the dim glow of the pumps, now operating on backup power or maybe a weak generator. A cold breeze stirred the stagnant air. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up. I told myself it was just the wind. I finished pumping and went back inside to grab a coffee from an old vending machine in the corner. The machine groaned, clunked, then slowly dispensed a cup. I took it, the coffee lukewarm but comforting. "Thanks," I said to the man. He only nodded, eyes never leaving mine. I noticed his hands. They trembled slightly, and the skin looked almost translucent under the flickering light. I turned to leave, but stopped when I heard something. Footsteps, soft, dragging, coming from the storage room behind the counter. I froze. The old man hadn't moved, hadn't even blinked. "Is someone there?" I asked. No answer. I edged toward the door that led to the back. It was ajar, revealing a dark hallway beyond. The smell hit me again, this time stronger, like something rotting. I considered calling out again, but the man's icy gaze stopped me. Instead, I stepped back and told him, I should get going. He sighed, and for the first time a flicker of sadness crossed his face. "Don't. Go around back." I paused, confused. "What do you mean?" He looked down, almost whispering, "There's things back there. Things that don't belong." Uneasy, I nodded and left the station. The night was cold, the sky thick with stars. I climbed back into my car, started the engine, and was about to pull away when my headlights caught a figure standing near the edge of the parking lot. A woman in a long white dress, her hair tangled and wild. She looked toward me, eyes hollow, mouth slightly open as if trying to speak. Then she vanished. I blinked, shook my head. Probably just a trick of the light. But as I drove away, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. A few days later, curiosity got the better of me. I tried to find Harrington's gas again, driving the same stretch of highway, but there was nothing there. No gas station, no building, no sign. Just forest and a narrow shoulder beside the road. I checked online, called local authorities, but no one had ever heard of the place. Weeks passed, and I kept thinking about that night. The strange man, the smell, the warning not to go around back. I was obsessed. One evening, I drove back to the area during daylight, hoping to find some trace. The spot where the station should have been was just trees. A faint outline of a clearing, as if something had once stood there but had been torn down or decayed away. I started digging through old county records at the local library. After hours of searching, I found a newspaper clipping from the late 1950s, a story about a gas station called Harrington's that had burned down in a fire one night. The attendant, an old man named George Harrington, had been found dead in the ashes. His body never fully recovered. Some locals whispered the fire was suspicious. Others said it was an accident caused by a faulty pump. One thing was certain, the station had been closed for decades. I thought back to the man I saw, the one who didn't blink or smile. The woman in white. The warning. It wasn't a hallucination. I had seen something trapped in a place between time and reality, still lingering at the site of that old tragedy. I never stopped at that stretch of highway again. But sometimes, when driving late at night on unfamiliar roads, I swear I see a flicker of a broken sign glowing faintly in the distance. And in that moment, I feel eyes on me, watching from the dark. Story the end. The gas station was on the edge of a tiny town called Millersville, in the rural parts of Kentucky. It was the kind of place where the cracked concrete and rusted pumps whispered stories of decades past, long before smartphones and convenience stores replaced the lonely outposts along quiet highways. The station had been there since the late 1940s, run by the same family for generations. By the time I got the job covering the night shift, the original owners had passed on, and the place was managed by a middle-aged woman named Linda. She was kind but tired, and she warned me from the start that the nights could get eerie. I was 21 and needed the job. It was October 2018, and I was fresh out of high school with nowhere else to go. The night shift paid better, and the hours suited me because I didn't mind being alone. Or so I thought. My first few nights were quiet. Maybe a couple of truckers like the occasional late-night wanderer, but mostly silence and the hum of fluorescent lights overhead. I would pass the time reading or catching up on phone calls, watching the occasional car roll in and out. But on my third night, the strange things began. It was just past midnight when the door chimed. I looked up, expecting someone to walk in, but the lot outside was empty, except for the fog, thick white fog that clung low to the ground like a ghostly blanket. I assumed someone had just passed by, setting off the sensor. Then I noticed the gas pump, pump number 4, was running. The numbers clicked upward and the familiar hiss of gas filled the air. But no car was at the pump. The nozzle hung loose, swaying slightly in the chilly night air. My heart pounded. I stepped outside, the gravel crunching beneath my boots. The fog was so thick that visibility was less than 10 feet. I called out, "Hello? Anyone here?" No answer. I approached the pump cautiously and touched the handle. It was warm, as if someone had been using it moments before. I turned it off and returned to the store, locking the doors behind me. Over the next several nights, the same pattern played out. Pump 4 would start running on its own around the same time, usually between midnight and 1:30 a.m., but no vehicle was ever in sight. Sometimes the nozzle would be off the pump, dangling in the air as if held by an invisible hand. One night, around 2 a.m., I heard footsteps behind the store. I grabbed my flashlight and stepped into the night. The beam cut through the fog, revealing nothing but empty air and swaying branches. Then I heard it, a faint, whispering voice, barely audible. "Help me." My blood ran cold. I spun around, shining the flashlight frantically, but no one was there. I hurried back inside and locked every door and window. Linda told me a story the next day. Years ago, a young woman named Evelyn had worked at the station. She had been engaged to a local man named Jack, who was known for his temper. One foggy night, Jack came to the station after a fight and threatened Evelyn. She ran into the night, disappearing into the woods nearby. Her body was never found. Linda said that Evelyn's spirit was said to haunt the station, especially around Pump 4, searching for help. That night, I was on edge. Around 1:15 a.m., the lights flickered, and the pump started again. I was frozen behind the counter when the door chimed. I looked up and saw a figure standing just inside the glass door, a young woman in a white dress, soaked and covered in dirt. Her eyes were wide with fear, and she raised a trembling hand, pointing toward the back lot. I wanted to call out, but my voice stuck in my throat. She stepped forward, but as she moved, her form became blurry and faded like mist. Suddenly, a loud bang echoed from the back lot. I grabbed a crowbar from under the counter and cautiously went outside. The fog had thickened, and the night was eerily silent. Near the edge of the woods, I found a broken branch and a patch of disturbed earth, like something had been dragged. I left immediately. The next morning, Linda told me that years before, the police had searched those woods after Evelyn disappeared but found no clues. I quit the job soon after, but I still think about that gas station. On foggy nights, when I drive past Millersville, I glance toward the old highway, wondering if Evelyn's spirit is still searching for help near Pump 4. Story the end. The night I started working at the gas station outside of Millersville, I thought it was going to be just another boring graveyard shift. The gas station sat along a long, isolated stretch of highway, surrounded on 3 sides by thick woods, and on the 4th by an old railroad track that hadn't been used in years. It was the kind of place people only stopped at if their car broke down or if they needed a quick break during a long haul. I was 21, looking for extra cash to pay rent and tuition, and this overnight shift paid well enough. The owner, a grizzled man named Carl, gave me a brief tour the first day, but warned me, night shift around here isn't for everyone. He didn't elaborate, but I figured he just meant it was lonely. I was fine with that. The first 2 weeks passed with hardly any customers. The only sounds were the steady hum of the refrigerators, the occasional creak of the old building settling, and the faint whistle of wind through the cracked windows. I'd fill up shelves, mop the floor, and watch the blinking neon open sign outside that seemed to buzz louder the later it got. Then the knocking started. At first it was soft. 3 knocks. Pause. 3 more. Always coming from the storage room in the back of the store. It sounded deliberate, rhythmic. I checked the door every time, but it was always locked, and I never saw anyone around. I told Carl about it the next morning. He didn't seem surprised. "That's just the place," he said. "Old building. Maybe rats or branches hitting the siding." I nodded, trying to believe him, but deep down I wasn't so sure. One night I was working around 2:30 a.m. when I heard a faint voice whisper my name. It was so soft I thought maybe I'd imagined it. The air suddenly chilled, and the humming of the refrigerators slowed until it sounded like they were dying. I looked up, heart pounding, but the store was empty. I told myself I was just tired, but the nights only got stranger. About a week later, a woman came in. She looked out of place, pale, dressed in an old-fashioned dress, her hair pinned back tight. She didn't say a word, just stood at the counter staring at me with dark, empty eyes. When I asked if she needed anything, she slowly shook her head, then disappeared. I checked the security footage later. The cameras showed an empty store, no one entering or leaving. That same night, I found muddy footprints trailing from the front door all the way to the back storage room. I was sure I had cleaned the floor that morning. More nights passed with flickering lights, radios turning on by themselves, and the knocking growing louder and more urgent. The back storage room door, which I always kept locked, would sometimes be found unlocked in the morning. Then came the night the power went out completely during a thunderstorm. The whole station plunged into darkness. I grabbed the emergency flashlight and crept to the breaker panel in the back room. The temperature dropped instantly as I opened the door, my breath fogging in the air. In the corner, a figure crouched, face hidden. When it slowly turned, there was no face, just darkness where the features should be, 2 hollow eyes glowing faintly. I slammed the door and ran back to the front, locking everything behind me. The next morning, Carl was gone. No one had seen him leave. The security cameras showed him entering the store the night before, but after that, he just vanished. The local sheriff said it was probably an accident in the woods, but no body was ever found. I quit the next day. Years later, the gas station still stands, boarded up and abandoned. Locals say you can still hear the knocking at night, and some claim to see a pale woman standing at the pumps in the rain. I don't drive by there anymore. Story the end. The highway was mostly empty that night, a stretch of 2 lanes carved through the endless forests of northern Pennsylvania. I was working the overnight shift at a gas station just outside a small town called Millersville. The place was old, one of those roadside stops that hadn't changed much since the 1960s. The pumps were vintage, the paint peeling from the walls, and the fluorescent lights flickered with a persistent hum. I had taken the job to help pay for school, figuring nights alone would be easy money. Maybe a little boring, but manageable. The first week went by without incident. The occasional late-night traveler, some truckers stopping for coffee and a snack, and a few locals who swung by for gas or smokes. The building creaked in the cold night air, and the ancient floorboards groaned when I moved around. But it felt normal, almost comforting in a way. Quiet, lonely, but nothing scary. It was the second week when I started noticing odd things. The first time was around 2:15 a.m. I was behind the counter cleaning the coffee machine when I heard a soft thud from the back storage room. That room was where we kept old stock and maintenance tools, and I hadn't been back there yet. I called out, "Hello? Anyone back there?" No answer. I went to check, thinking maybe a rat or something, but the room was empty. No sign of disturbance. I shrugged it off and went back to work. A couple of nights later, I was restocking the cigarette display when the lights flickered, and the sound of a heavy object hitting the floor echoed through the store. I froze. No one was around. I checked the security cameras, but the feed was normal. No unusual activity. When I went to investigate, I found a box of snack bars knocked over, their contents scattered across the floor. That was when I started feeling watched. I couldn't explain it otherwise. Sometimes when I was alone, I'd catch movement out of the corner of my eye, but when I looked, there was nothing. The air would suddenly turn cold, even though the heat was on, and I'd feel a prickling sensation on my skin. One night around 3 a.m., I was sitting at the counter when the doorbell chimed. I looked up, expecting a customer, but the parking lot was empty. The door was locked. I always made sure to keep it that way after midnight. The bell rang again, softer this time, and I swear I heard whispering, indistinct voices carried by the wind. I walked outside to check the lot. The cold night air hit me like a wall, and the silence was absolute, except for the faint rustle of leaves. No cars, no people, no footprints. I looked back toward the station and saw a figure standing by the far pump. The figure was a woman, wearing a long white dress, her hair dark and flowing, but her face was turned away. "Hello?" I called out, my voice trembling slightly. She didn't respond. I blinked, and she was gone. I hurried back inside, locked all the doors, and sat down. My heart pounded, but I tried to tell myself it was a prank, or my mind playing tricks. I told my manager the next day, but he just told me to be careful and not to wander outside alone at night. The next incident happened a few nights later. It was raining heavily, the kind of rain that makes the world seem smaller and sound muffled. Around 2:30 a.m., I was tidying the restroom when I heard footsteps behind me. Quick, light steps running down the hall toward the main store. I turned to call out, but no one was there. I walked back to the counter and found the restroom door slightly ajar, even though I was sure I'd closed it. Suddenly, the lights flickered and went out. The generator kicked in, and the emergency lights glowed dimly. I heard a voice, a soft, desperate whisper right behind my ear. "Help me." I spun around, but there was no one. For the rest of the night, the station was cold and silent, except for the buzzing of the emergency lights. The following days, I looked into the history of the gas station. What I found was unsettling. In 1978, a woman named Sarah Morgan was last seen at that very gas station. She was traveling back home from visiting family, but she never made it. The official story said she disappeared after stopping for gas late one night, and despite searches, she was never found. There were rumors the owner at the time was involved, but nothing was ever proven. I started noticing more strange things after learning that. Late at night, the smell of perfume would suddenly fill the air near the pumps. The old payphone outside, which no one used anymore, would ring, but when I answered, there was nothing but static. One night, I found the bathroom mirror fogged up with words written in the condensation. "Find me." I don't know what compelled me to go out back, but I did. Behind the station was a small wooded area, dense and shadowy even in daylight. I searched the ground carefully and found something disturbing, a rusted, small locket buried beneath the dirt. I opened it and saw a faded picture of a woman. Her eyes stared straight at me, haunting and sad. That night, the whispers grew louder, voices overlapping, pleading for release. I couldn't stay anymore. I handed in my resignation the next day. Before I left, I told my manager everything. He sighed and admitted he'd heard stories from the old-timers that the station had a dark past, a secret that some locals never spoke about. Since then, the station has closed down. The pumps are rusting, and the building is boarded up. But sometimes when I drive past on a dark night, I still see the faint glow of the station lights, and if I stop, I swear I hear the faintest voice begging for help. Story the end. The night I found myself at that gas station started out like any other long drive. I was making the trip back from a conference in a small town in Arkansas, driving through winding roads, the kind where the only signs of civilization are distant flickering lights and the occasional rest stop. I'd been on the road for hours, tired and eager to get home, but when my gas gauge started flirting with empty, I knew I had to find a station soon, or risk getting stranded. The sky was overcast, the moon hidden behind thick clouds, and the road ahead was slick with the remnants of an afternoon rainstorm. I kept my speed slow and cautious, eyes peeled for any sign of a gas station. After what felt like forever, I saw it, a faint, flickering neon sign that read Fletcher's Gas and Market. The sign's light was uneven, with some letters blinking off and on like they were struggling to stay alive. I turned off the highway onto a narrow and cracked driveway and pulled up to the pumps. There were two old, rusted gas pumps under a grimy metal awning, and the whole place looked like it had been forgotten by time. The brick building behind them had peeling paint, and the windows were dark and covered in dust, but a small flickering light hung above the entrance, casting weak illumination onto the concrete. I shut off my car and stepped out into the humid night air. The silence was almost oppressive, broken only by the distant chirping of crickets and the occasional rustle of leaves in the breeze. There was no sign of any other cars, no movement inside the station, and no lights on beyond that weak porch light. I walked up to the door and tried the handle. It was unlocked, but heavy, and it creaked loudly as I pushed it open. Inside, the station was dimly lit by a few flickering fluorescent bulbs. The air smelled stale and musty, a mixture of old coffee, dust, and gasoline. Shelves lined the walls, mostly empty save for a few scattered cans of soda and bags of chips. I called out, "Hello? Is anyone here?" My voice echoed back at me, but no one answered. I moved closer to the counter and noticed an old cash register, covered in dust, its drawer slightly open as if someone had left in a hurry. Behind the counter was a door leading to a back room, which was shut tight. I felt a chill run down my spine. Something about the place didn't feel right. Suddenly, the lights flickered and went out completely. The station was plunged into darkness. I reached for my phone to use the flashlight, but realized I'd left it in the car. My heart hammered in my chest as my eyes struggled to adjust. In the faint glow of the emergency exit sign, I saw a figure standing near the back room door. A man. He was dressed in a faded blue uniform with a name tag pinned to his chest, though I couldn't make out the name in the dim light. His face was pale and gaunt, his eyes sunken and fixed on me with an intensity that made my skin crawl. He didn't move. Then, slowly, he raised a hand and pointed directly at me. I stumbled back, knocking over a display of empty soda cans that clattered loudly. The man remained motionless, his gaze unwavering. I turned and bolted for the door. As I stepped outside, the weak porch light flickered back on. I got into my car, started the engine, and pulled away as fast as I could, not daring to look back. The next day, I told a local mechanic about the gas station. He listened carefully and then said, "You probably saw Carl." "Carl?" I asked. "Yeah," he said. Carl was the night attendant there in the 80s. One night, a robbery went wrong, and Carl didn't make it out. The place shut down after that. He said some folks swear they see Carl's ghost at the station late at night, still standing by the pumps, waiting for someone to notice. I haven't been back since. But sometimes when I'm driving late, I swear I see a flicker of blue in the corner of my eye and a pale face watching from the shadows. Story the end. The gas station had been a fixture on the outskirts of my hometown for as long as I could remember. It was one of those places that felt stuck in time, weathered wood siding, a flickering neon sign that buzzed incessantly, and a single gas pump that creaked every time someone filled up. The kind of place locals drove past without a second glance, but if you were ever stranded late at night, it was your only hope. I took the night shift job there in early fall. The previous attendant had left suddenly, no explanation, just a brief note on the manager's desk. They said I was brave for taking the position, but honestly, I thought it was just another quiet gig to pay the bills. The first few nights passed without incident. Most customers were regulars, truck drivers, late-night wanderers, or the occasional lost tourist. The store smelled faintly of gasoline and stale coffee, and the fluorescent lights hummed overhead in a constant monotone. But then the strange things started. On my third night, just after midnight, a woman came into the store. She looked out of place, wore a long white dress like something from another era, and her hair was wet, though the night was dry. She didn't speak, but wandered the aisles slowly, picking up a bottle of water with trembling hands. When I rang her up, her skin was icy cold to the touch. I blinked, and she was gone. Outside, there was no car, no footprints, nothing. Just the empty parking lot under the dim glow of the lone street lamp. That was when I heard it, a faint whisper from the back room. I grabbed a flashlight and cautiously approached, but the room was empty. The feeling of being watched grew heavier, a weight pressing on my chest. I started locking all doors and windows, double-checking every corner. Each night, the incidents became more unnerving. The door would chime, though no one had entered. Shadows shifted in the corner of my eyes, lights flickered violently, plunging the store into darkness before flickering back on. Once the pumps started dispensing gasoline on their own, the meters ticking upward with no nozzle in hand. One night, the air turned so cold I could see my breath indoors. A melody, soft and mournful, floated through the store. It was a lullaby, the kind my grandmother used to sing. The singing grew louder, coming from outside near the gas pumps. I stepped out, heart pounding, but found only the empty night and the rustling of leaves. The stories came together in my mind. Years ago, a young woman had died nearby, hit by a drunk driver just as she stopped at the station. Locals said she never left, that her spirit lingered, trapped between worlds, searching for peace. One late October night at 3:15 a.m., the door chimed again. I turned to see the woman in white standing at the entrance, eyes hollow and pleading. She didn't speak but reached out a hand. I was frozen in place until she faded into the night. I quit the job the next day. The gas station still stands, a lonely beacon on the highway. And sometimes when I drive past at night, I swear I hear that lullaby carried on the wind. Story the end. It was just past midnight when I pulled off the highway and into the gravel lot of the small gas station. I was driving home from a late shift at work, tired and a little jittery from too much coffee and not enough sleep. The old station was barely lit, the neon sign above the door buzzing erratically. The building looked like it hadn't been updated since the 1970s. Faded paint, cracked windows, and a thin layer of grime coating everything. I had no idea what compelled me to stop there, really. I usually avoided these rundown places on the outskirts of nowhere. But that night, with my gas tank nearing empty and my eyes burning from fatigue, I felt like I needed a break. The door creaked as I pushed it open, and a bell jingled somewhere inside, though the place was otherwise silent. No music, no hum of refrigerators, no other customers. Just the fluorescent lights flickering overhead, casting uneven shadows across the worn linoleum floor. Behind the counter sat an old man with a lined face and piercing blue eyes. He wore a threadbare uniform shirt with a name tag that read Joe. When I said hello, he didn't respond at first, just kept staring blankly ahead. Then, slowly, he nodded and motioned toward the pumps outside. "Pump 3, I said, fishing a $20 bill out of my wallet. He took the money without a word, his fingers trembling slightly as he slipped it under the register. I grabbed a coffee from the counter and took a cautious sip. The coffee was bitter and cold, but somehow comforting. The station had that strange smell, the mix of gasoline, dust, and something faintly sweet that I couldn't place, like old wood left to rot in dampness. I was about to leave when I heard it, a faint scratching noise coming from the back room. It was slow, deliberate, like nails on a chalkboard, but wetter, almost like something clawing at wood. I looked at Joe. His eyes were fixed on the wall behind me, unblinking and unfocused. "Is something back there?" I asked. He didn't answer. Curiosity got the better of me, and I walked to the door marked storage. It was cracked open, and a cold draft escaped from inside. I peered in, but the room was dark and empty except for stacks of old boxes and a flickering fluorescent light overhead. The scratching stopped. I turned back toward the counter, but Joe was gone. The chair rocked slightly as if he had just left it. The bell on the door jingled, and I heard footsteps crunching on gravel outside. My heart started pounding. I grabbed my coffee and hurried to the door, pushing it open into the night air. The parking lot was empty except for my car. Then I saw her. Standing at the edge of the lot, just beyond the dim glow of the street lamp, was a woman in a white dress. Her hair hung loose, tangled and dirty. Her face was pale and gaunt, eyes hollow and fixed on me. I blinked, and she was gone. I stumbled back into the station, the door slamming shut behind me. The lights flickered wildly, and a cold gust swept through the room. The air grew thick with the smell of decay. I heard a whispering voice behind me, soft and urgent. "Don't look back." I froze. The voice repeated, louder this time. "Don't look back." I forced myself to turn around, but the room was empty. The fluorescent lights dimmed and went out. Darkness swallowed the station. I fumbled for my phone but found no signal. The scratching started again, louder and closer. Then, footsteps. Heavy, slow footsteps approaching from the back room. I backed toward the door, but it was locked. I pounded on it, shouting for help, but no one answered. The footsteps stopped just beyond the door. A cold hand gripped my shoulder. I screamed and spun around, but no one was there. The lights flickered back on, and Joe was sitting behind the counter again, staring at me with those hollow blue eyes. "Time to go," he whispered. I ran to my car, slammed the door, and peeled out of the lot. The next morning, I searched for that gas station, but found nothing. No sign, no building, just overgrown weeds and a patch of cracked asphalt. The locals I asked had never heard of it. I never stopped at that highway again. But sometimes when I drive late at night on lonely roads, I swear I see a flickering sign in the distance, beckoning me to stop. And I don't. Story the end.